Hello to those of you who are already here. I have got books. My drum keeps vibrating with my voice every time I speak. It's not in its case. So I was unsure what I was. Everyone just wants me for my books. I was unsure. Hang on a minute. I was unsure. What was I unsure about? Has that worked? Oh, I'm sure it will. I can't even remember what I was saying now. I was unsure what I was going to choose to do today on. So I thought, I'm now unsure about being unsure. I was unsure about what to do today on. And then I thought, I've got literally, I think, nearly every book that Dr. David Lewis has written. So why don't I just kind of show some of the bits and pieces, not just his books, but some of the bits and pieces off, just as a conversation startery bit. And if it's boring, then obviously I won't show them. I will stop. But it's somewhere to start. So anyone who finds this video interesting, feel free to give it a thumbs up. Anyone unsubscribed who decides you want to subscribe, feel free to subscribe. And thank you, those of you who are joining me here. And thank you for liking my stories, those of you who are commenting. Yes, the drum should roam free, as long as it doesn't run away. So so I let's talk a bit about my relationship with Dr. David Lewis. Back in 2003, 2004, I was on a, let's try and work out where best to have this camera. I was on a hypnotherapy training course over in Brighton, and it was at Brighton. I always get it mixed up. There's two universities, Brighton University and Sussex University. They're on opposite sides to each other of the train track. And I've been there for numerous things, and I can never remember which one I was in when I did the hypnotherapy training at the time. But I met Dr. David, I think it was Sussex, can't remember. But I met Dr. David Lewis on this hypnotherapy training course. I am a bit of a SWAT, so I sat at the front in the lecture hall. Dr. David Lewis ended up sitting next to me, and we ended up talking to each other. Somehow ended up hitting it off and being kind of friendly and thinking, yeah, we actually have a lot that we like here. Because most people on the training courses, I kind of think, no, you're not really someone who I can imagine holding. You're not obsessed enough, or you're not into the subject enough for someone who I'd kind of long-term hold conversations with. Whereas Dr. David Lewis, being a neurologist, was into neurology and psychology and stuff like that. And he handed me, I'll see if I can find it. Let me see. Is that his book? So on the, I think it was the second day of the course, he handed me a bit of a SWAT, a bit of a nerd, someone who just sits there at the front, kind of thinking, okay, teach me. I won't misbehave. I will sit here and do as I'm told. So hello to those of you who can't loiter. So on the, I think it was the second day, David gave me this book, Breathe Easy. Let me try and make sure the light isn't on it. De-stress, build confidence, and focus your mind in 7 days. So I read this book, bought it back at the next session, and went and handed it back to him. And he said, no, that's your book. I gave it to you. And then he pointed out he'd signed it to me, which I obviously didn't notice at the time. I didn't bother paying attention to the beginning of the book. I just literally flicked through the first load of pages to get to the first page of actual learning in the book. I never really read the first few pages because it only tells you the title, which you know because it's on the front of the book, and it tells you the year it's made or the year it's written. but you don't need to know that necessarily unless it's really old and you want to know it. So I kind of glossed over all that, went away, read it, went to hand it back to him, and he said, "No, no, it's your book. I gave it to you." So that was kind of my first meeting of David, and then we kind of obviously got on well throughout the course and chatted a lot. And then he, after I got ran over, I needed some work because I'd lost my job, so I needed some sort of self-employed work, and I've got no interest in the title page really. If I'm reading the book if I want knowledge, I just want to dive straight into the pages with the knowledge on. So yeah, so I dived. So I dived. So after getting ran over, needed some work. I contacted. I contacted David and said, just been ran over. This was 2005, so I'd only known David for like a year and maybe 2 years or something. So just been ran over, and there's no Batman on my shirt. Just been ran over, and I need to make some money. And he said, "Oh, I'm just off to Dubai to work on a documentary about fear. Do you want to come along and do that? It'll be a week's work. You'll get, I think it was like £500 or something. You'll get £500 for the week's work. Obviously, have your own room in a 5-star hotel while you're there. You can come along as part of my science team." So I went along to Dubai with David as part of his neurology science team to work on a documentary about fear. And then after that, I went up and did some childhood memory studies that David was being hired to do. That was quite fun. Hello, Abby. So yes, that was fun doing the childhood memory studies. What we had to do was hypnotize people adults of various ages, and say and kind of have them recall being a child. And the idea was, all I'd say is to recall a happy childhood memory and tell me what it is. No, just to recall recall a happy childhood memory and tell me what it was. And so so it's Dr. Lewis, who's why I was buried alive. So so I sort of hypnotized people, and we asked these people, tell me a happy childhood memory. The idea was, what would people recall? If you're an adult and you're kind of hypnotized, you're just in a nice, relaxed, receptive state where you can allow yourself to become absorbed in whatever it is that we're doing. What is it that you would recall? And the idea of the study was, obviously I was hypnotizing a lot of people over this day, and the idea was, what do people recall? What was interesting is that every single one of them, but one of them recalled something else as well. Every single one of them recalled outdoor memories with family as a child, kind of playing on the beach or playing in a park, or it was also playing type memories. One of them also recalled the first time they went on an aeroplane, and it wasn't the going on the aeroplane, it was the first time they went to an airport and they saw the giant nose of a plane at the window. And that to them was kind of an awe-inspiring memory as like a 5-6-year-old or whatever. But they also all recalled memories at about the same age. They were all about 5-6 years old or whatever it was. So that was quite interesting to kind of hear that they were all, it didn't matter who the person was, it didn't matter whether they're male or female, it didn't matter what age they were as an adult, whether they were 70 or 80 or whether they were 30, they still all recalled the same kinds of things. And it was as part of David and his team were being commissioned as part of a thing to look at, are we going to lose something as children nowadays? Are children nowadays going to lose something by the fact they spend a lot more time sitting indoors on a computer console, for example, or staring at a screen. What would they recall? Are we actually taking away the things that have formed memories in the past that have been happy? So obviously it wasn't down to David to reach the conclusion. It was just he was presenting the sort of, this is what the data is we've got. It's up to them whether they say, could we be doing this, or however they write up the story. So yeah, and then David and myself just continued to keep in touch. David wanted to make a product with me of doing kind of care and control behavior management stuff. So obviously, as I've said before, the thing that I'm, outside of YouTube, most well known for is my kind of parenting knowledge and managing challenging behavior of children and teens and stuff like that. And that includes things like restraint training and sort of managing behavior broadly. And so David wanted to turn this into a 2 DVD video where, yes, I'm hoping they do have memories other than screen time. So David wanted to make a video, and so we looked at making this DVD set, and that kind of fell through because we're trying to work out the market you would sell it to and what have you. We looked at making a number of other DVD courses and things. There wasn't really downloads at the time. I was doing downloads on my website, but there wasn't like high-speed internet or anything, so it was far rarer. Well, I think the thing is, because what we wanted to eliminate was people consciously, when they recall what they think of as their kind of first thoughts of happy childhood memories, is often different to when you're not trying to find a memory, when you're just asked a question and you instinctively respond with something. And what we found was that when you're instinctively responding, that's where you come up with something. People would come up with something like, playing with a kite on a beach with your dad, or playing in a meadow somewhere, or whatever it happens to be. Whereas I think, for example, if you asked me about memories, I know consciously that I would probably just say, and I know this would be my answer for at least up until now in my adult life, that I would consciously just say playing in the woods on my, being in the woods on my own. So if I was asked about happy childhood memories, it would be being in the woods on my own, and sitting in a tree or something. It wouldn't be with others. And so I know that's my conscious answer. I don't know if I was asked unconsciously, so to speak, whether I'd give the same answer if I was asked about happy, because to me, that's not, by the definition, that's not happy. That's just neutral. That's just, I liked doing that, and that's neutral. So I don't know if I'd give a different answer if I was asked in a different type of context. So goodbye to Bella and anyone else who, I think I saw someone else say they couldn't hang around, but just saying hello. Now, in relation to the autism thing, I saw autism worded. Well, for having the improved empathy, it's about getting out there and practicing. It's not that you could do it with hypnosis as such. So you can't tell someone to have more empathy. So they can do mental rehearsal, because that's obviously what I would do, is I would do mental rehearsal. So you don't need hypnosis to do the mental rehearsal. But it can be easier to have a guide, so to speak. And that's kind of what you use in the hypnosis for, is to have a guide. So, for example, if you were to have someone mentally rehearse, it would be, before you can mentally rehearse, you need to know what you're mentally rehearsing. So you need to have the education around what is empathy. And there's a difference, because obviously I talked about this kind of among my Autism Week videos, where there's that thing of, the fact that I'm with Abby is evidence that I love Abby. That doesn't mean that that's enough connection that Abby would accept as evidence that I love her. And obviously we talked about this kind of on the session where Abby talked about being with me. So it's the same, that it's a case of, you can think, well, I've got empathy because I care about that, but are you caring at the right time in the right place that's relevant for the other person to think, yes, that's when you care? Because, for example, Abby talked about the elderly lady who tripped over in the main road, and obviously I just carried on talking and didn't care in the slightest, because as far as I was concerned, she was already standing up. There was no traffic coming at that point in time. Um, she didn't, she was already standing up. She didn't need any help. It wasn't like she was injured from the fall, and she was already then going to be crossing the rest of the road, and there was no traffic, and she would have easily crossed the road before any traffic had even, got to her, even if it came into view at that moment in time. So to me, there was no need to pay any attention to this elderly woman. It's just people trip over. That's life. If she wasn't standing up, if she looked like she needed help, then I would go over. But that can then sound like that lacks. I didn't feel anything towards her, and even if she'd hurt herself, I wouldn't feel anything towards her because it's not me that's hurt. But I would want the best for her, which means that if I thought she was at risk and I saw that, I would then go over there, very practically go over there and do what, help her, make sure she's safe or whatever. But if I didn't feel she needed that, I had no interest in, I wasn't going to go, oh my God, are you okay? And all that kind of stuff. And that kind of situations happen quite a lot. It's quite frequent when you're out and about that you see people who've fallen over, or you see people who've been hit by a car, or whatever it happens to be. And you glance over, you assess the situation, you make a judgment of whether there's a role that's needed for you specifically based on how you've assessed it, and then you carry on with your life. And if there is a role that's needed, then you take that role. But if there isn't, then you don't. And so some people would then say, well, you should have empathy. You should feel what they feel. And obviously a big part of being autistic is theory of mind, struggling with having that theory of mind of being in someone else's head and thinking they would want me to do this, so that's what I'm going to do. And it's hard to intellectualize that and get your head around that. So a large part of it is how much does the person themselves want that empathy, so to speak? Well, what are you defining as empathy? How much does the person who is going to be having, the autistic person, so to speak, how much do they want to develop this skill to someone else's satisfaction, for example? Is it being done for their benefit because they want it, or is it being done for someone else's benefit because someone else wants them to react towards them in a different way, or react towards other people in a different way? And if it's the latter, then obviously you're on a losing battle straight away, because the person obviously doesn't want to engage in that right now. But that's where obviously a large part of it is about education. And obviously this is what I found helpful as I talked during Autism Awareness Week about the fact that learning hypnosis is one of the things that taught me a bunch of these kind of skills, that there's different ways people view the world, and you can read people differently, and you can learn patterns of people, and you can learn, so when someone says I love you, they expect you to respond with something like I love you too. And so you learn that as a pattern of how to respond. And then it's trying to get that balance, because what you get sometimes is like when someone says, say sorry, and you say, okay, I won't mean it, but I'll say it if you want me to, sorry. And people say, you've got to say it with like you mean it. Yeah, but I don't mean it. So I'm saying it because you want to hear it. And people don't want you necessarily to just do an action because it's what you think is the logical thing that you're supposed to do. They want you to do things and mean them. And that isn't something that you can necessarily force. You have to kind of also understand. For example, I won't say sorry if I'm obviously not sorry, and if I do get told, well, I want you to say sorry, you're nothing's moving forward until you do, I'll make sure that I'm clear. Well, I'm going to say sorry, but I obviously am telling you now I don't mean it in the slightest, because I'm obviously not sorry. But if it's what you want to hear, sorry, there you go. I'm not going to lie, so I'm not going to obviously tell you I'm sorry when I know I'm not. But if you want to hear those words just because they're arbitrary and you'd like to hear them, then I'll tell you those words. So it's kind of getting that balance of what is the purpose of it. And for example, I think I make a very good therapist, but I think part of what makes me a good therapist is that I don't really empathize. I don't really have that kind of emotional connection to the person who I'm doing therapy with, because I think that would really ruin my ability to do good therapy if I started feeling um, impacted on by kind of getting emotional or emotionally invested in the therapy. What I want is to be detached and looking at the situation without getting emotionally invested. And so for me, as Abby mentioned, my presence is often the evidence that I'm happy for this moment in time to be continuing. Like I'm happy to be in a relationship still, because, or else I wouldn't be in this relationship. So, um, if someone gets hurt, I don't instantly think, "Oh, you poor person," because I my brain just doesn't work like that. Obviously, I don't want the person to be hurt. I don't want anyone to be hurt. But if someone's hurt, I don't instantly think, "You poor person." I just sort of weigh it up, and if it's something that needs some kind of practical intervention, then I'll help. If it was brought on by themselves and they knew this was the consequence, then I wouldn't help in the slightest. Um, as I talk about in my autobiography, uh, people have injured themselves in front of me where I've said, if you do that, you will hurt yourself and you could die. And then people will do things, and I've told them what the consequences are. So my assumption is, if you know what the consequences are like, could well be, and you still choose to do it, you've just said, I am more than happy with that consequence to happen to me. And so, because if you weren't more than happy to have that consequence happen, why on earth would you do something that might have that consequence when you know that's what might happen? Like the kid who, like the teenager who I worked with at Butlins, he was probably like 18, 19, and he was messing around with the pot wash machine. I obviously talk about this in the sort of as an adult section of my book. He was messing around with the pot wash machine, pulling on the conveyor belt, trying to prove that he's stronger than this machine is and that he can force it to stop. And I kept saying to him, if you keep doing that, you might get some clothing or your watch or your ring or something caught onto the conveyor belt, and you'll then get dragged into the pot wash machine because it sort of drags everything in. And I said, and if that happens, it's literally 98 degrees centigrade, nearly boiling water. That's the first thing you encounter, followed by cleaning chemicals, which are corrosive, or, sort of not good for your skin, followed by even more boiling water, followed by more chemicals, followed by more water, and then very hot air. And the person sort of said, don't care, not listening to you, not quite so politely as that, and carried on messing around. His ring got caught on the conveyor belt, and he started getting sucked into the machine. And so, as far as I was concerned, he accepted that he was more than happy to be scolded and to go through the process of going through the machine. So I carried on with my job completely unaware, completely not paying a single bit of attention to him screaming and shouting and panicking, because as far as I was concerned, he knew that was the outcome potentially, and he had accepted, he's very happy with this outcome to happen, because if he wasn't, why on earth would you keep doing the behavior? Unfortunately, people on the restaurant floor heard his screaming and came in and pressed the emergency stop button. But as far as I was concerned, it was his own choice. No one forced him to be an idiot. And so again, people would then see that as not being empathetic, but actually it's a case of people are in control of themselves and their own outcomes. And if it doesn't affect anyone, if it's not hurting anyone else, then, so if he was going to do something that put a child at risk or something, I would protect the child, because the child isn't choosing to put themselves at risk, or the other person, whoever it happened to be, wouldn't be choosing to put themselves at risk. But if you do something and you know the risks to yourself and you carry on doing it, even when people say, look, don't do it, not supposed to, this is what could happen, I'm happy to let whatever the consequences are happen to that person. So the whole empathy thing, comes down to kind of working out who the empathy thing's for, what the skill is you're trying to develop, how you're trying to develop that skill. Obviously, lots of education is the main way to go, that you want to teach the exact kind of response that's needed for each situation, and then realize, obviously, that that response is normally kind of a robotic um, choice type of response. It's not you're doing it for the benefit of another person. You're not doing it because you genuinely mean it. You're doing it because that's what you're supposed to do for that exact situation. Um, because the things that you, like me, the things that I see as evidence that I care or something is the fact that I'm choosing to still be with someone, or spend time with someone, or listen to someone who's talking to me. So the evidence that I'm comfortable doing this live stream is the fact that I'm sat here doing this live stream, because if I didn't want to, I wouldn't do it. Um, so you're curious about what's on my t-shirt. I might have to show you in a minute. Um, yeah, you don't want someone showing so much compassion that you end up consoling them. But yeah, with the just scrolling back, see if there's anything else I've missed. With the I think the compassion thing or the empathy thing, I think what parents of autistic children, teenagers, whatever, often end up finding is that the more they learn about autism and learn about how their specific child responds to the world, the more they realize, oh, but I know my son, daughter, whatever, um, has empathy because in this situation they do that, or in that situation they would do this, but they do it in their own way. But then there are other times where, because of the way an autistic brain is kind of wired, they just wouldn't even know to do something because it wouldn't even cross their mind. For example, it might not cross their mind that there's a problem or that there's a need for it. They don't know, so for that situation you want me to respond in that way. But for the fundamental things, most parents end up saying, well, I know they love me because and I know they care about me because. So even though there's other behaviors that might be more pronounced a lot of the time, that could be causing problems or whatever it happens to be, there are specific bits that yeah, but the fact that they choose to come to me when they need help, or the fact that they talk to me whereas they perhaps are selective mute in other areas of their life, or um, the fact that I can walk in a room and they'll just glance up ever so slightly, whereas anyone else walks in the room and they don't even look, or whatever it happens to be. Sometimes it can be really subtle. Um, you can often find the evidence that, for them, that is what demonstrates their care for others. Um, but it is very hard to learn. So in this situation, others think and feel this. But that's not so much about hypnosis. That's more about, you've got to sit down with the child and at an age appropriate level, whether a child, a teen, or an adult. Um, so age appropriate as in learning age, not actual age. So maybe comprehension appropriate. I never know what the right term is, what the right term would be, because it's not about the age, it's about whether they can understand. You would go through that and find like what needs to be taught to them, and just educating them about, a bit like I did for myself in a lot of areas, educating about how to respond, that makes others, and giving the reason, the justification for why you're going to respond. See, the one time, obviously, that even though I think my natural inclination isn't to help, is obviously when my job role is specifically to help. So if I'm, say, when I was working in children's homes, if a teenager did something and I told them, if you do that, this bad thing could happen, then my view is, um, it's my job role to intervene and do the parenting role here. So I would then do that parenting role. But if I'm not in that parenting role, so to speak, whether it's a real parenting role or whether it's a paid, like you're a carer or something in a children's home, is um, that if you're in it, you do your job. If you're not in it, then people make their own decisions. And I also feel a bit different when it's young people versus people who. So, for example, and I talked about this during Autism Awareness Week. Don't know. I've always thought of him as Dr. David Lewis because his name's David, and so I then just call him David afterwards normally. But I like people to know who I'm referring to. So yeah, so I talked about this during Autism Awareness Week about. Can't even remember what I talked about now. You distracted me with your question. Yeah, about how if somebody is, I used the example of when I was in care, we weren't allowed to go outside and no, you weren't allowed to stop kids going and getting into cars with paedophiles because you're breaking the law if you do that, if you work in children's homes and things, because you're breaching the child's human right to freedom. You're not a locked children's home. You don't have a license to be a locked premises. And so by stopping the child go out the front door when they say, I want to walk out the front door now, I'm going out the front door now, means you're breaking the law because you shouldn't be stopping them getting into a car with a paedophile. My view was that is the most stupid, ridiculous thing in the world because the child, and so the child would be thinking, they're like my best friend. They give me everything I want. They bought me this, they bought me that, they supply me with drugs. I don't understand why you keep saying they're not a good influence. So obviously, minors and people who lack mental capacity can't make their own judgments. They're not making sound judgments. And so you would step in and intervene for them because clearly they can't make those sound judgments for themselves. So my view was that even though I was breaking the law every single time I did it, I wouldn't let kids go and get into cars with paedophiles. And my view was I'd rather stand in court and make that public that I was doing, I was protecting people, and I'd rather lose my job than not lose my job, but allow kids to get abused. And that's just kind of my way of looking at it. And so, yeah, so it was a case of because they think they're doing something that's perfectly fine, they don't see that they're doing something putting themselves at risk. It's me, the adult, who knows the situation better than they do. So I think that's the difference between the young people who you'd be perhaps caring for in a children's home or whatever, and someone who's 18 or 19 who's working in a job now and who you've repeatedly warned and explained, literally spelt out the risks to themselves. So in exactly the same job, I had a manager who refused to wear personal protective equipment. She said, it makes you look ugly, it makes you look stupid. There is no way I'm making myself look ugly and stupid. And I kept saying, she was having to clean the wall. And I kept saying, if you throw those chemicals at the wall and they splash off the wall, I know a bit about science. Anyone who knows about maths or science would know when something hits a wall at one angle, it bounces back at another angle. I said, it could go in your face and it will burn and it could make you blind, etc., etc., etc. And again, that was another example of someone who was my manager, who just like this sort of colleague of mine, this lad, decided to tell me, not listening, not paying attention to you, couldn't care less what you say, not wearing the personal protective equipment, doing what I want, threw the chemicals at the wall, it went straight in her face, and she had some problems and ran out screaming and unable to see and all the rest of it. and sort of asking people for help and stuff. And again, it was like, well, it's not like it was unknown. Literally, it says on the bottles what will happen if you don't wear the personal protective equipment and it gets in your eyes or on your skin. Um, and she should know better. It's her choice what she chooses to do. So yeah, so the whole sort of people being dumb, I just think, well, there's a difference between being dumb and doing something where you've been told there is this danger. Are you sure you want to be doing this? Because if that happens, you could die, you could get seriously injured, whatever. And if the person still thinks, yeah, I'm happy to do it, well, that's their right. But yeah, so that's probably largely, that was my first full-time job. It became very clear when I was like 16, 17, doing my first full-time job, became very clear that I already wasn't really set out for jobs with people where the expectation is that I'm interacting with people, because I would be um, blunt with customers. I would, if a customer said I gave them back the wrong change and I knew I gave them the right change, I would obviously stop the entire till, say, I'm cashing up the till. If the till's wrong, you're right. If the till's right, I'm right. And it could be like a busy summer day. It's in a holiday camp. It could be a busy day in the middle of summer where you've got 1,500 people trying to get through the till in about a 2-3 hour period. And I would stop the till and cash it up because of this one customer. And I wouldn't care that it would literally hold everyone else up, making everyone else have to wait with their food going cold for hours while I'm cashing. Not for hours, but there's a knock-on effect. So it's for hours by the time you get to the back of the queue. So there's a big knock-on effect. And I wouldn't care about that. I wouldn't care how many people are getting angry with me saying, look, just give them the tenner or whatever. Or it would be, no, I'm right. And so we'll cash this up. That will show I'm right. The customer isn't right. And then the customer can go. And so reasonably quickly, I was put in the pot wash so that I'd be in a room on my own and I'd almost see nobody at all for an entire 15-hour shift, which was exactly how I like it. I've always pointed out, if someone would pay me enough to live on to do that job, that's what I would be doing now above any other job that I've done, unless someone can figure out a job that involves me walking around the woods all day. Above any job that I've done, working in a pot wash, loading and unloading a machine with no one in the room with me is literally the ideal job. I have worked with ADHD children who were impulsive. Nearly all of my work has been with children who are deemed to be some of the most difficult in society. I think everywhere has a stupid amount of it going on. On one of the, I was quite shocked when I got into doing care work in children's homes. I was shocked when they announced, when during one of the child protection, because you go on really big child protection training courses and things, and you have courses that last sort of 8 days just around child protection, so not even all the other stuff that goes with it. And they would always point out what the large number of known paedophiles in the area was, and that this is common among everywhere, not just that area, and that they reckon that's 1/10 of the paedophiles out there, because obviously that's only the ones known and caught. And it was, I can't remember the figures now, but it was something really, really stupidly high. It was like, in our area, there was estimated to be 10,000 or something really stupid. It was a way over the top figure. Yeah. The odd thing is, a parent or a babysitter would get in trouble if they let their kids walk out the door. But if you're a foster carer, you get in trouble if you don't let the kid walk out the door. So my mum, as a foster carer, wanted to put or had a lock on the front door, a sort of bolt lock that had always been there. It was like, get to bedtime, you bolt lock the back door, you bolt lock the front door, and you go to bed. But that was deemed to be locking the child in. That if the child decided to go out during the night or at any time, they were technically locked in a locked facility because mum was a foster carer. So they were then technically in a locked facility, and mum wasn't hadn't got a license to be a locked facility. So she couldn't lock the front door. She could, obviously, the front door could be locked as in it's shut and you can't open it from the outside, but she couldn't kind of double bolt it so that it added extra security, and no one would, obviously, it's harder to then kick the door in if someone tried to rob the place or anything. She couldn't do that. And she found that made it very difficult as a foster carer when some kids and teenagers and things would just go to the door and want to open it and go out the front and potentially leave during the night or whatever. And you're not allowed legally to stop them. And she used to argue that obviously she's got 4 children and never had this problem with her 4 children. You know, parents don't get told you're not allowed to lock a door. I am a therapist, although, well, I now work just as a therapy trainer. I don't. I almost never see one-to-one clients or anything now. So the only clients I see nowadays are if it's during a training course, and I'm working with them as a demonstration subject in front of the audience. Hello, Cecilia. Just reading down. I've got a pile of books next to me and other bits and pieces. Hello in Toronto. The story last week, I think, went okay. Yeah, I don't know if mum's argument. Obviously, you make a good point there. I don't know if mum's argument would have been different. Yeah, whether it would have been taken differently if she had her own kids living with her at the time as well. 'Cause the whole point was that her kids, you know, we'd all moved out, and so she couldn't use the argument of, yes, but I always lock it because I have my own children. But I don't know. It never kind of got tested, the idea of whether they would have looked at it differently. Um, but I've always seen it as a really dumb kind of rule, and that it's missing the point a bit. That when you lock a house for everyone's security, like at night time, or for people's safety or whatever, you're not doing it necessarily like a locked unit. But yeah, it does make things very, very difficult. It's a bit like, now I'm obviously someone who personally thinks that parents ideally shouldn't smoke while they're parents, because of the harm it can do to their children, and their children aren't choosing to potentially be at risk of lung disease or anything, or other smoking related illnesses. And even if the parent smokes outside, etc., there's still the risk to the child, because I think there's a recent study that showed how much smoke hangs around, that if, say, furniture or clothing has got smoky from smoking cigarettes, that leaks out for hours afterwards, causing, I think it was something like 20% as much harm from that item of clothing as the cigarette itself causes, just from it leaking out. But I've worked with a lot of families that do smoke, and that's their choice. So although that's my personal view on these things, I obviously don't impose that on people because there's not a law about me having to impose it or anything. I just think that putting people at risk who don't have the choice to be put at risk isn't a kind or fair thing to do. But I've worked with families where social services have got involved. I've helped this family to literally sort their lives out, making it so that their kids are back in school. They've cleaned all the dog mess off the carpet. They've removed all the used sanitary towels off the carpet. They've made it so the garden can be used by their kids again. They've got furniture in their house again, literally transforming that family's life. And then social services have said, we can't get uninvolved from this family because the parent smokes. And the parent smoking means that they're causing harm to their child. And so it's kind of an odd part of the rules where the social worker won't get involved. If they walk past a family in the street who's smoking with a child in a pushchair, they don't instantly say, right, we're getting involved with that family. We're getting social services involved with that family. And yet when they are involved, they won't get uninvolved for that reason. And so I would then end up in meetings arguing that, yes, I would love this parent to stop smoking, stop putting that child at risk for smoking. But is that really a social services level? We have like 4 levels of kind of social care need here in the UK. It's kind of divided up into 4. And so that's like the level 4 kind of stuff. Is it really at that level, given that you literally can walk down a high street and see 20 or 30 or 40 different parents doing exactly the same behavior who have no social services involvement? So there are certain rules that are kind of counterintuitive or illogical that use up service time that shouldn't be used up. So my view is, if you've managed to turn all this around for this family, maybe social services time could be better spent doing something else. The same with medical professionals. I don't drive, and my dad, when he was dying of cancer, fell out of bed when he tried to go to the toilet, and there was no way I could get to him. It was like 2 a.m, no way I could get to him. And there's no way, because he was literally bones by then, and in constant agony everywhere throughout his body. And I said, so he phoned the ambulance. The ambulance said, we refuse to come out and help you. We're not a service that comes and helps people who've fallen over. We refuse to come and help. And so he then phoned me and said, I need help. I can't get off the floor. I obviously then said, well, phone the ambulance, because they'll come out. They're medically trained. They'll come out. They can lift you because they're trained to manually handle and stuff. They'll lift you. They can get you, check you over, make sure nothing's broken, get you back into bed or whatever. I'm coming out. I was going to be there at like 8 a.m. or something. And they flatly refused. He told me, well, they've refused. So I then phoned the ambulance and said, my dad has fallen. He's told me he's fallen. I obviously can't get there. And even if I could, I wouldn't want to try and lift my dad, who would just be like a loose sack of potatoes. I'm not happy to lift him on my own. I'm worried that I'd break one of his bones or something if I did it. And I'm worried that what if the fall has broken something and I'm unaware of that? And then maybe, he fell and broke a rib or something. He's in constant pain through his body. I may not know he's broken a rib. I could then lift him, puncture his lung or something. So I'm not prepared as a non-trained person to do that. Can you send an ambulance just to get him back into bed, make sure he's okay? I'm coming out at 8 a.m. in the morning anyway to feed him and, clean him and stuff like that. So could you do that? And they said to me, no, we're not a service who goes and does things like that. If someone falls, we expect family to be the first port of call and family to go and pick them up. And so I then kind of kept arguing with the person on the phone. And then they said to me, we'll investigate it. Don't call us. We'll call you. We'll call you back. So I then didn't call them. I waited and they didn't call me back. They just were saying that to get me off the phone. And so I then had to keep calling them back. Eventually, after many hours of being very blunt and forceful about how I felt this was putting someone at even more risk. And my dad is at this point still lying on a floor, suffering, and he's still lying on the floor suffering. Well, he had chest pains. They had his medical record because they'd had to come out to him before. He had esophageal cancer, so he had pains literally throughout the whole of his chest, his throat, his whole body, his lower back, and his intestines, and eventually, I managed to convince the ambulance to go out to him. They went out to him, got him back into bed, checked him all over, and then refused to leave. They said, "We can't leave someone who is in this condition because he could hurt himself." And so I was then on the phone to someone who was from one of the ambulance crew saying, literally, I've spent like 4 hours trying to get you to visit his house to lift him up and get him back, make sure he's okay and get him back into bed. And now you're telling me you won't leave him alone. And my dad's begging you to go because he wants to get attempt to get a few hours sleep before I arrive in a few hours time. And they were saying, we can't leave him. We can't leave a man in this kind of condition because he could hurt himself. And so that, I'm sure it's the same everywhere, but there's these kind of areas where you get people who, on the one hand, from rules, you get people who, on the one hand, say, no, our rules are we can't step in and help. And then on the other hand, are saying, well, now we know what the real situation is because we're here. We can't get uninvolved because of this. So it gets quite awkward, I think, when there's that kind of mismatch. You just want clear messages. But yeah, and I know my dad was incredibly difficult as a person. Even before he was dying, he was incredibly difficult as a person. He had a good way of being able to antagonize people, but you just think it should be about treating people with kindness and respect and doing your best for people. But yeah, so I wanted to kind of just show some of David's bits and pieces that I happen to have. One of the things that he's known for, people often sort of say that he's the father of neuromarketing. So people say that David is the father of neuromarketing, and one of the first books of his I read outside of the one I've just shown was Soul of the New Consumer, that he wrote with Darren Bridger, which is a neuromarketing kind of book about why people purchase things. And so stuff that used to really interest me, still does, about David's work was where he would do things like he'd have the eye tracking glasses on people, and he'd have EEG devices on their heads, and he'd have galvanic skin resistance things on, and then he would send people to look at different products, or send people into shopping malls and things, or to look at window displays to see what people respond to, like what kind of gets attention before they consciously know they've done it. And he was on a BBC documentary that I saw him on once, around the time that I'd met him. And he was able to see on his computer that was connected to the brain scanner thing, the EEG device and everything that's on the person. He was able to say, and the eye tracking glasses, he was able to say, that woman has just noticed that pair of red shoes in that window of the shop, and she's going to try and buy them. And he was able to tell that, obviously, from the brain scan and from the her eye movements before she thought about going to buy the shoes. And so then, so she was sort of walking down the shopping mall, down sort of between the aisle, not paying too much, just sort of looking around, seeing what's around. And then she started veering off to this shop, and then went to started looking at these red shoes. And obviously, probably at this point, about a minute earlier, her brain had already decided she was going to really want these shoes, and she was looking at these shoes. It had lit up in areas to do with, getting kind of a dopamine hit and a feel good kind of flood of chemicals and all these sort of things. Um, but she was unaware of that. When she was asked for her subjective experience, it was, oh, I was just walking around, as you do, and I was looking like you told me to, just to walk through the mall. And then I just sort of wandered over, thought I'd look in the front of that shop. And then as I was looking, I sort of spied those shoes and thought, oh, they look quite nice. Um, but actually, her brain had shown quite a way back that that's what she was going to do. And this kind of work of David's fascinated me. And so I obviously had to then read books like his Soul of the New Consumer. And he's done others kind of like that. I'll go through. They're kind of in a random order next to me just because of how I lifted them up in front of the camera and then had to dump them back down. A recent one that I contributed a little bit to. There's a quote in there somewhere from me. I don't always get. He's a neuroscientist. His main thing, he focuses on stress, and psychologist. He's a registered psychologist and neuroscientist. And his main thing is he focuses on stress. And let's see, this is one of his recent books. So I'll tell you how he defines himself, if he's defined himself in here. Nope, it doesn't define him in here. I'll find one in a minute, and I'm sure it'll define how he defines himself. But this one I contributed a little bit to, around some of the tricks that fast food outlets use in their advertising and things to be able to nab you into going and buying your fast food. I talk about things like, for example, the McDonald's jingle, and the fact that started off as Justin Timberlake singing "I'm Loving It," and then it would end with, and then Justin Timberlake would sing "I'm Loving It" as the words "I'm loving it" show on screen, which works as an embedded command and a direct suggestion to you. You see that on screen at the point that they play that jingle, means that then in the future McDonald's adverts, they just play the jingle and they have the words on screen, but you tell yourself, because you know it by now, "I'm loving it." And so what you're doing is linking you telling yourself a direct suggestion, "I'm loving it," with seeing the McDonald's M. And so you then become more likely to have a positive association and to want McDonald's. So there's these sneaky kind of tricks. And so that's something I contributed about there. But a lot of what I'm going to put these on the floor as I go. That's the breathe easy one. So I'll rush through some of these, but there's things like he does a lot of work on the sort of areas that he seems to focus on are stress, neuromarketing. That's quite a big part for him. And education and stuff in relation to children, and then also learning and education for adults, like memory techniques and things like that. So Thinking Better is one that he did with James Green. And then you got things like information overload, Think Smart, Act Smart, another one with Darren Bridger. That's another one that I contributed a little bit to. I think some of these I've contributed stuff to and not got, I'm unacknowledged. Others I've contributed to and then been in the acknowledgements. I don't mind whether I am or not, really. And you got things like Get Your Message Across, a practical guide to power communication. And some older ones where he was focusing a lot more on stuff with children, like you can teach your child intelligence, probably something needed from time to time. Help your child through school. Yeah, I quite like Think Smart, Act Smart is just a small book about thinking smart and acting smart, just to be vague. About focus, concentration, giving fresh perspectives, analysing options, making decisions, handling stress and emotions, and taking action. So there's quite a lot crammed into this small little book, and I quite like it. It's a kind of new book that I quite like the feel of. You'd asked. Some of them are a bit more questionable of his in terms of telling people what people think or whatever. But there's your child's drawings, their hidden meaning. Helping your child through school. Did I show that already? Winning new business. This one's an interesting one. I was fascinated when I was younger about the way that children communicate non-verbally before, and can learn sign language and stuff before they can talk, because it takes a lot more muscles and a lot more stuff going on to verbalize and say words than it does to do learn hand gestures and things. So you've got things like the secret language of your child there. One full of tests. I quite like test ones. Know your mind, know your own mind even. And 10-minute time and stress management. I think David's re-released this as a 10-minute stress management book online and on the mindchangers.co.uk. I think on our website, he's got some of these as ebooks that you can access. And the secret language of success. I'm trying to talk now. Obviously, I have a lot of books. Helping your anxious child, for those who have anxious children. Impulse. I think, did I contribute something to this? Let me have a look. Don't know. There's Impulse. That's about people being impulsive and about, I think it talks about kids being impulsive as well. This book's getting a bit old now, but I think it talked about ADHD and impulsive children as well as adults. But that's about impulsivity. This one's a more recent one of his neuromarketing ones. Just seeing how he describes himself here. Chartered psychologist. The brain cell, when science meets shopping. Fight Your Phobia and Win. That one I think David's recently re-released as an ebook. And then he's got some from back in his more kind of his older days, as it were. Yeah, I thought Brain Cell was a cool title when I found out about that. Many of these, or many of the newer ones at least, David writes them and then says, "Oh, I'll send you one." So I just end up getting them in the post, and then I read them and add them to my shelves. So this one is about a murder and some other bits and pieces going on. And it smells nice. Most unnatural, that one is. Mind skills, giving your child a brighter future. Peak performance past 40. I'm now of an age where maybe I need that. Life unlimited. Sexpionage, the exploitation of sex by Soviet intelligence. The Alpha Plan. Horror, what are we reading? Don't read horror things. Makes me scared. I rarely read horror things. And then one of his most recent books, this is a proof copy, but I've contributed stuff to this as well, is Triumph of the Will, which is the two men that hypnotized Hitler and changed the world. It might already be in the White House, for all I know. So yes, that one I find quite an interesting book. It's about the psychiatrist who treated Hitler after he was gassed in the First World War, and the techniques that psychiatrist used, Dr. Forster. And then it's about the stage hypnotist and kind of mind person who taught Hitler how to do stage hypnosis type stuff. So he taught Hitler, for example, to make sure that he's above eye level, make sure that he does things at night time with just a spotlight on him. So it holds a bit like I would say to somebody, just look up at the spot on the wall and just hold your gaze on that spot on the wall as I talk to you in the background. And as I talk, you can just begin to find yourself drifting, relaxing, floating deeper asleep. That's it. Going all the way deeper and more relaxed asleep. And so you'd have someone looking up at a spot above their eye level. And so Hitler was taught this. He was taught, make sure that you set up a way of being on a podium higher up than people's eyes so that everyone has to look up at you, getting a bit of eye strain, getting focus. Make sure you're doing it at night so that everything else is dark and you can just have a spotlight on you so that everyone holds their gaze. That then puts everyone into being more into hypnosis and becoming more trancey. Then add in, music and stuff that's repetitive, and that's not gory particularly. But yeah, and then you do a monotonous kind of repetitive voice that gets people engaged. And so that's what the stage hypnotist guy was teaching Hitler. So he had those two hypnotists, the one that turned Hitler from the failure that he was thought of as during World War One into someone who believed that he was destined for greatness and that he was the next coming. And then you had the one who taught him how to actually do his presentation. So he deepened his voice when he was doing the presentation so that he talked with a more commanding tone, so that he talked in a more hypnotic kind of way. He got his rhythm. And so, yeah, so that's, I quite liked reading this when I was reading I was sent obviously a proof version to read through to check that David wanted to know what my input was in relation to whether what Dr. Forster was doing with Hitler could really have had the impact that's claimed to have happened. And as I was reading, I was thinking, wow, this is incredible that this is written down, that he did these techniques. And it's just a shame that he didn't know what the outcome of his techniques was going to be, because the outcome wasn't particularly good. And it didn't end good for him. He obviously disappeared when Hitler became powerful and successful and in power, as did anyone who knew anything about these things. But yeah, so that's an interesting book. And then he's got, some of these are on our themindchangers.co.uk website. He's got his sensualization, which is essentially guided meditations, just David reading them or telling them with, it's a video, and it's got I think Brighton Beach, probably, I think it is, in the background. So you've got the beach in the background and the sea and all the rest of it. Mastering Your Memory, which features, is it Dominic O'Brien? Let's have a look, make sure I get his name right. Yeah, Dominic O'Brien. The memory, well, one of the, at the time he was a world memory champion. So it features him, and that teaches you kind of learning and memorization skills, and pass that exam. 7 steps to exam success, or examination success. So he's got a number of different bits there, and then he has a pack called Botao. Brighton's just down the road. David lives just outside of Brighton, and I live 35 miles or something from Brighton. So it's about 45 minutes on the train, I think. So Botao's all about breathing and breathing techniques and stuff that I think I just can't bring myself to doing it. Like using they're like teapots that you pour the water through your nostril so it comes out your other nostril to clean your nose out and stuff. So that's Botao. I think at one point David had this available for download, I think, off of the Mind Changers. I don't know if it is now, but it's DVDs and a book. The book is the Breathe Easy book, so I've got another copy of that. So it's 2 DVDs and a book. But yeah, the water thing, I don't think they show it on here. No, I was wondering if they had it on the back at all, as like an image. But it's that I just can't bring myself to do it. Yeah, that is just down the road. See, I can't bring myself to do it, but where you put like lukewarm water in one nostril, tilting your head so it goes in your nostril, out that nostril, and comes out your nose, running all the gunk from in your nose out into whatever's beneath you. And to me, it's just like, no, that is not happening. Yeah, that'll be the thing. Yeah, for me, it's just not going to happen. Yeah, just down the road is somewhere that I can get to. That's kind of my definition of just down the road, is can I get there on foot? So I would say anywhere within maybe a 30-mile radius is probably just down the road. And lastly, David was a photographic journalist for years and years and years. And I'd highly recommend getting this book just for the photos. So he wrote or created The Way It Was, which is a photographic journey through 60s Britain. So I definitely think this is I like this book. I love the images in it. He shares a lot of them on Facebook as well, on the Way It Was Facebook page that he set up. but it's got sort of obviously just simple things like bathing. Let's see what else is in here. Festival things, bunkers, skydiving, science. There's quite a few animals. There's a dog and bone. Hippo. Some more animals. Different stunts. So that's quite fun. I quite like the images in the book. Did he sign that one? What this one? Yeah, he signed that one. And obviously he signed the proof copy of that one. Trying to see, did he sign Impulse? Nope, that's not signed. And that one. But yeah, so he's obviously we've got lots of different stuff available on the mindchangers.co.uk website. And then he's got lots of his books on Amazon and other places, and he has Facebook pages for his different bits and pieces where he shares lots of things. For example, on his Facebook page for the Hitler book, he has shared things like old footage, like World War II kind of, I suspect it's World War II, footage of a psychiatrist treating someone using hypnosis, treating obviously what then was called shell shock, and showing the person obviously shaking and sort of being impacted by it, and then having hypnosis, treating them, and then showing them being calm and okay and what have you. So he shares some interesting psychology videos and things as well, which is quite cool. Yeah, to me it's probably wasted, but it's very kind of him to send me copies of his books and sign them. Hello back to India. Yeah, so it's very kind of him to sign these books and send them to me, and to ask my opinion for things. It's quite nice that I'm just a Joe Blogs. I'm sort of a nobody, and yet he asks my opinion, and sort of asks about things that are going to be in his book and wants me to share my knowledge, which is quite nice. I think he just found that a fascinating area, a growing area. So he's obviously getting on a bit now. He's been. I've just shown that he was doing journalistic photography back in the 60s. So yeah, he was doing that kind of stuff, and then he got into doing psychology and then lecturing in psychology and then moving into neuroscience. And so that means he's kind of come through that era where all of a sudden, um, you've got all this new technology, exciting technology coming up, where you're, say, a psychologist in a university, you're fascinated by neuroscience, and you're using brain scanning devices and all things like that. And you think, wow, wouldn't it be incredible, as he sort of thought, wouldn't it be incredible if people used this kind of stuff to see what is going on in the brain when people look at products, or when people walk into a shopping center, or when people look at a car. So he's told me about, like, working for car companies where there'll be loads of people walking past, say, lots of a certain brand of car, and all the cars are just subtly different. So one might have different wing mirrors to another, and one might have a slightly different shaped uh, bonnet and windscreen. One might have a slightly different shaped boot, and the back of the car. They might have slightly different heights, or might have slightly different kind of shape to them, like more rounded or a bit more squared off or something. And so obviously he's told me about these times where, you know you've got these groups of people walking through, and they're looking at, like, oh, I can see the eye tracking shows that predominantly women looked at, say, the wing mirrors first when they approached the car. So then, if the manufacturer is thinking, right, the car we are trying to design, this is the target market. We want a car that appeals to, say, for example, women between 35 and 50, who've got this kind of income. Say that's what they're searching for. So then you look at it, well, the people who meet that kind of criteria, what they seem to look at when you've got them all coming into a room, walking past multiple versions of the same car, all sort of mocked up, is they like that type of shape to the car. They like this feature of that car. They like that feature of this car. And so you then whittle it down and you create a car using the kind of features that seem popular for that target group. And then you walk people through again. And do they respond to that car better than the other cars now that you've whittled it down based on the responses that you got? And it's more accurate than verbal responses. So it's more accurate than, walk past each car and rate out of 10 how much you like the car. And people will think, well, something just didn't feel right about it. I can't put my finger on what it was. But the brain scan and the eye tracking could pick up, well, what's different is that they didn't like. So you get a better response just by looking at the neurology than you do by trying to get feedback from someone verbally, where, as we've talked about often here, witness testimonies are really bad, really sort of not particularly helpful. We're very inaccurate about a lot of what we think we think. He has amended some of them. Some of them I've been kind of loosely involved in the amending. For example, he sent me copies of them and said, "Oh, how do you think about this now based on that?" And so he would send me bits and pieces that I've looked over. Other bits, for example, the Hitler book is based on a previous Hitler book that he'd written, and he'd kind of updated it, found new research as the decades have gone on, and then added that new research to it, and then checked with an actual hypnotherapist this time. Is what is said here something that sounds like it could have been done or could be plausible? Because the records are now really old, and it's trying to sort of weigh that up. And so, are we by the Hitler books? A wild title. Don't know which words we're focusing on. We're just back to custard. So yeah, so he does ask, or has amended some of them, updated some of them, changed his views of some things over the years, I think, as science has progressed. And as I have. My first hypnotherapy books are, um, he has got a number of books about Hitler, but the one obviously I showed here is Triumph of the Will, which is the one about the two hypnotists who kind of made Hitler Hitler. Um, and yeah, so and hello for popping in and saying hi or saying hello. Yeah, so a bit like with me with my hypnotherapy books, my first hypnotherapy books were written essentially me sharing um, uh, what I believed to be correct because it was based on all the stuff I'd been taught. Whereas my recent hypnotherapy books, I've learned so much over the last 2 decades or so that they're significantly different to those first books. My views on things are significantly different. How the research has progressed and how that's then shaped where I'm at now is significantly different. So that's why I started writing my Hypnotherapy Revealed series of books, because my views are so different now compared to where they were. And I wanted to be able to write that down and share that for people to see how things have changed. Just reading. I can still hear my drum constantly vibrating to my voice. I must be constantly talking with a certain note that makes one of the bits of the drum vibrate. Uh, yeah, I always do these at a time after I've eaten. So I try and eat about 6, half 6-ish, be done by 7, grab myself a coffee, an after dinner coffee, grab myself, normally I have water with my meal and then water after the coffee, and I've got water with me now. Yeah, I've no idea what I project though. Let me have some of my water. But yeah, so I just sort of thought that obviously to try and think of something. Oh yeah, I haven't shown you. This is the t-shirt I'm wearing. My Freaky Friends t-shirt with my one-eyed monster on the t-shirt. What is he talking about? Sounds like quite a common comment. Like, oh, what is he talking about? Normally it's followed by the word now. What is he talking about now? Waffling on again about some weird subject. Yeah, I like this. I think I bought this. I was talking to Abby earlier. I think I got this in Dubai, where we'd literally got ourselves lost and then found somewhere. Good night. Hope you get some sleep. We found somewhere. I was soaking wet with sweat, and we found somewhere to buy a t-shirt. And I wanted to be putting on a t-shirt that wasn't sweaty, and so I think this was the one that I bought and kind of liked it ever since. Yeah, books aren't weird. It's the people who read them. Um, yeah, I agree on the pot washing guy being stupid. He didn't actually work in there. He messed around this once and then never came back in again while I was in there. Something about the situation made him feel that it was just better to stick to his own venue and not try and act big and tough and what have you. Obviously, there is that thing that you can do where you cause people amnesia so that as soon as they leave the stream, they forget what it was that went on. And the harder they try to remember, the more you forget. And the more you forget, the more you try, and the harder you try, the more you forget. Realizing you forgot what it was you didn't remember, only discovering now that you don't remember what it is that you didn't know before. Forgetting everything and remembering everything else as easily as any distant dream. And won't believe you haven't forgot until you leave here and realize you have. Wondering whether you really did, discovering the answer when you realize you can't remember. And realizing that the more you rewatch, the easier it is to forget each time. But knowing the more amused you find it, the deeper you go and the more you forget and the harder it is to remember. And the more you try to ignore what it is that I'm saying, the quicker and easier you respond. And just when you think you're not responding, you discover that you are. Well, how long is time? So I just kind of wanted to, obviously, rather than always talk about me, which is an easy subject to talk about, or talk about, um, or talk about, just hypnosis all the time. I thought, oh, let's talk about something a bit different. And I thought I literally have half a shelf of David's books. So I thought if I get a bunch of them down, I could just go through them and just show off some of what, given that I do collaborate with David on projects and we do have a website together where we sell different items, like digital downloads and all sorts. Um, I thought it was just something that um, people wouldn't necessarily know about or have looked up or what have you. Pickle the cat. That is a mean thing to do with cats, pickling them. Which story was Pickle the Cat? Have I released that yet? Or is that the one that I'm going to have to edit for Wednesday? I can't remember. Was that the one? I can't remember when that was. Woohoo! Someone from the UK. It's always nice to see. There's fewer of us. Yeah, Pickled Cat. Yes, in fairness, I did call him Pickle or her Pickle. Is that a male or female name? I don't know. Did call the cat Pickle or Pickles. Did I? I don't know. Pickles maybe. But all I'm thinking of now is Pickled Cat. Um, but I don't think I've edited that yet. Have I? Don't remember what happened in the story. I vaguely remember a cat on a lap. That must have been 2 weeks ago. Cat on a lap and going in the garden. It raining. Was that the one? I can't remember. No, that was a different cat. I don't know. I can't remember what cat it was. Yeah, I think it is a good name for a cat. Pickles. Probably better than Bob. Although you got to worry if one cat's being bobbed and one cat is being pickled. Yes, I like cats, so there's no need for them to hide. Yeah, Bob the boat. There was something I was going to show and I can't remember what it was. I thought of something while talking. I think I showed. Oh yeah, I was talking about books I'd contributed to. I think I showed that before, didn't I? The clinical hypnosis textbook by Professor Ursula James. I contributed a chapter to that. Somewhere. Some, like me, might say that it was the best chapter in the book. Yeah, it's obviously there. Chapter, is that 17? Yeah. I know. Well, you've got to. The saying is always go there first. If you want someone to relax, you need to relax first. If you want someone to be confident, you need to be confident first. If you want someone to forget, you need to do that thing first. That's why when I do the rewind technique, for example, I always act like I'm forgetful and not kind of remember. I sort of say that old, the distant memory thing. And I'm saying that because I want to stimulate the idea for forgetfulness so that the person who's responding is making it so that this is an even more distant kind of, this doesn't need to be remembered kind of memory in terms of how it's been remembered up to that point. Um, what was the title of this one? The Clinical Hypnosis Textbook. Is that the book you're asking what the title was? I don't know if that was the title you're asking about. Yeah, obviously you can always forget to forget until later and remember to forget when you get to the end of this. It's up to you. Um, the yawns probably weren't catching because you spent all your time counting them and commenting on them and getting different patterns being triggered rather than engaging with them. It's like if something about the yawning made you laugh, you're then likely to keep laughing instead of yawning. Yeah, trouble is I've got multiple Facebook pages and Facebook groups. And so I can't remember what they are because I just click on them. I don't actually read what they are. And I rarely get asked what they are unless I'm on here and someone says, "What is it?" But that's quite rare. It's only recently that I've been doing literally like live streaming every day. Abby has been hypnotized. I don't often I don't do therapy or anything with Abby because I just feel it sets up the relationship wrong, or at least for me personally, it feels like it sets the relationship up wrong where I've got like a one up position in a therapy kind of context. and I don't want that kind of, you know, I'm better than you kind of setup, if that makes sense. Um, and obviously, as a therapist, you have to be totally different to how you are in normal life, in terms of, like, I'm going to be very blunt, very direct in terms of how I'm communicating what I'm saying and doing. Um, and so if I was doing therapy, that would then be an issue. So if I was, say, exploring certain things, I want the freedom when I'm doing therapy to know that I can be blunt about things and direct about things, and um, have open conversations about things without it kind of ending up feeling like that could become some kind of a weird setup because you're being two slightly different people. But hypnotizing, yes. In fact, I think everyone always hypnotizes each other, so that's not a surprise. Most parent friends I know have their kids being hypnotized from pretty much birth. They start teaching their kids hypnosis and doing their hypnosis with their kids, so that their kids learn hypnotic, how to do hypnosis instinctively as part of their learning communication while they grow up, so that they're then much better at doing it themselves. Let me put this one back up on the shelf, all the way up the top there. I've obviously got my Marmite up there as well. So yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to share today. I've got to think of what to do tomorrow. Why teach your child hypnosis? Because it's incredibly handy for someone to be able to know how to, you know, have greater control over themselves. Um, what is Marmite? Yeast extract, black goo that tastes as you imagine black goo would taste. Um, so yeah, so obviously you teach your kids hypnosis, ideally from birth, virtually, so that they grow up with skills to have greater skills over themselves. They grow up being able to have improved communication skills, improved abilities at kind of understanding communication from others, abilities of being able to interact with others better. Um, and yeah, so that's kind of why you do it. It's like, why would you teach any child communication skills? Um, you know, you're doing it because you want them to be able to communicate as well as possible with people, and you also want them, in the case of something like hypnosis, to be able to communicate with themselves as well as possible, so that if they, for example, have a headache when they're sort of a bit older, perhaps they can use certain kind of, they can manage to focus, they can manage to perhaps create numbness or whatever they need to do, that maybe they can then learn how to do self hypnosis much easier, go in and out of hypnosis, and um, be able to then guide themselves in, do some mental rehearsal, all these kind of things. It's just very handy. I know that my best friend told me that when his first child was really young, that he'd be sat on the sofa with her, and whereas he used to obviously use breathing to hypnotize his daughter, um, she would then learn that, and by the age of like 2, he would realize that she's been breathing the same as him, and then she's been deepening her breathing, and he's found himself drifting inside and beginning to drift off, being guided by his daughter, who's matching his breathing and guiding him in to hypnosis. Um, so, and in fact, that's one of the biggest reasons I think is a good reason to teach it, because when you're with people who are I don't know that well, I don't think there's anything I've ever said that's not a great way in my youth. I can't think of anything that's not great. Um, but yeah, so obviously one of the best things is when someone's perhaps anxious. I've sat down next to people who are anxious and then breathed the same as them and then calmed myself down so that I'm then calming them down so that their anxiety levels then decrease and they start feeling really calm and relaxed, and their mind then clears and they start being able to think clearer, and they can then potentially communicate if they want to about whatever it is, or they don't have to, but at least they're no longer anxious about whatever it was that was making them anxious. So having that skill that you can literally just sit next to people, breathe the same as them, and obviously you do that as a therapist. You That's one of the things you do when you're a hypnotherapist or any therapist, I like to think, that you breathe the same as your clients when they walk in the door, that the second you see them, you start breathing the same as them, and you carry on doing that the whole time. That's sort of one of your goals, is that you're going to breathe the same as your client. And then while they're telling you that, say that's the first session, they're telling you, oh, I've been told I should come and see you because apparently you can help with this problem, and this really winds me up, or that happens, or whatever. And they're telling you all this, and you're just breathing the same as them, nodding, listening along, and gradually you're then slowing your breathing, deepening your breathing. They start talking slower, start talking calmer, start relaxing more, and then gradually you just see them wanting to drift off and close their eyes, and you haven't said a word yet. All you've done is nodded along, listening and making noises to continue them being able to carry on doing what they're doing, like a ah, or whatever noises you're making that's relevant to the bit that they've just said, just literally just to keep them explaining. And then all of a sudden they go very quiet, and then you can start talking. But now all you have to do is start talking with a calm voice, and they're already they're already hypnotized. So all you're doing then is actually letting them know what to do next. So you might say, why don't you just take a moment to close your eyes just while I talk to you? And then they just close their eyes and they're already gone. You're just kind of then giving them that permission. Um, so yeah, I think it's just literally learning those few skills. I think it's invaluable, and I actively think that any parent should be teaching their children. Any child should hopefully be learning. If you're someone who already struggles with communication skills and social communication skills and what have you, it's incredibly useful to learn all these techniques and to learn about body language, to learn about facial expressions, to learn about physiology, how different muscles work in relation to different things that we say and do, um, to learn about things like the way the throat gives away what people are saying and what have you. Um, yeah, and that's kind of what is mentioned within the electrodynamic man that I flashed up here the other day. That it's about matching rhythms, and you've got to somehow get that rhythm. So I've often talked about the fact that I'm looking for the person's heart rate, and you can see it like either in the side of the neck, or you can see it in the temple, or you can see it in the wrist, or you can see it in the ankle. If they've got their legs crossed, the top leg will bounce in time with their heart. And then what you can do is cross matching. So that's where you match one rhythm with something different. So you might tap kind of on your leg or on the arm of your chair or something in time with their heart rate, and then you can tap slower and start slowing down that tapping. Once you've built that rhythm, so you've synchronized the rhythms, you can then start slowing down the tapping, and then the heart rate starts slowing down because it's synchronized with your tapping. And so even if they don't hear the tapping, they just see your hand out of their peripheral vision. They see that your hand on your leg is perhaps tapping in time with their breathing, in time with their heart, they don't pick up on that's what it's doing. They don't pick up that it's tapping in time with their heart consciously. But that rhythm, you notice it's leading their heart rate, and you can slow it down. Um, it could be that you nod gently in time with their heart rate, just very slightly, or you blink in time with certain rhythms, or whatever you're doing, you're matching rhythms. And obviously, the one that's difficult, for example, is getting your own heart specifically. You can control your breathing, but to get your own heart, just like as a choice, in sync with someone else's heart, it's significantly harder to do. Once you've fallen into sync with someone, then you can do that. You can um, your heart rates will naturally be synchronized as well. But before you're in sync with someone, it's very hard, unlike breathing or cross matching, like tapping or something. It's very hard to kind of think, right, slow my heart down, slow my heart down. Their heart's at that rate, slow my heart down to match it. That's significantly harder. I've not yet met someone who can't be hypnotized. The thing is, someone being hypnotized and someone being able to do stuff within hypnosis are two completely different things. So you could hypnotize someone, but that doesn't mean they can suddenly hallucinate things brilliantly, or suddenly create numbness in their body, or whatever it happens to be. So doing the hypnosis is normally not the problem. The people who are hard to hypnotize are those who aren't necessarily intelligent enough to understand and grasp what it is that you're doing with them. And part of that then comes down to, you need to make what you're doing even simpler for them to understand. So if they just don't understand, if they can't figure out what you're doing, can't grasp it, then that's not going to work. But really, hypnosis is just about focusing attention and then increasing responsiveness. So that part happens every time someone picks up a book and gets involved in a book. You've become kind of hypnotized by that book. If you watch a film, say a horror film, if you watch a horror film and then jump at a scary scene on the film, you've been hypnotized by the film, because why should you jump at a scary scene on a film? So I'm not necessarily talking about a jump scare, which obviously you're going to jump at, but like jump because you're like kind of shocked by what you've just seen, or it's like, oh my God, there's a bad guy there, or there's a ghost there, or something that kind of jumps in terms of something a bit longer. Just reading some messages, then I'll carry on. So yeah, it's obviously interesting, people who can go from stress to relaxed pretty quickly. And the thing is, sometimes it's a bit of an illusion. Uh, this is something that you learn in relation to doing things like where you're dealing with violent or aggressive people. That if the person's violent or aggressive, so I'm not talking about someone who's violent or aggressive from a controlling perspective, where it's an artificial, which is what's common among domestic violence, is that it's normally a controlling violence or aggression or whatever it happens to be, that sort of abuse part. It's not a genuine "I am angry" response. It's not an uncontrolled response. And the police will often kind of, you know, when they give the training courses on it, will say, you know, we can tell whether this is someone who's doing domestic violence as sort of a power control type thing, rather than someone who perhaps has lost control. And so that's why they got angry, because they calm down instantly when the police arrive. And that's always evidence that that person had never actually, it's like an actor playing a role. You know, the actor playing the role can scream and shout all the abuse as part of their role, and then they'll say cut, and then they'll say, "So how was that? Did I do a very good job there? Was that convincing enough?" And they're instantly calm, because they were never angry. They were just kind of acting a part to get in the actor's role. They're acting a part because that's the part. But in domestic abuse cases, normally they're acting that part to gain power and control and use fear and all the rest of it. Um, Whereas if the police arrived and the person was still angry and still smashing things up and whatever they're doing, the chances are they've genuinely lost their temper. They've got angry. And if someone, if it's a power and control thing, then addressing that at any point obviously doesn't re-trigger it. If it's an anger thing, so someone's lost control and they've become incredibly violent and angry and single-minded and all the rest of it, then even when they appear calm, the reality is your body's been flooded with all the sort of, stress hormones and things to do with fighting or running away. So it's very easy over the next few hours if you say, "So what happened? Why did you suddenly lose control?" That could be enough to make them now rethink about whatever that was that took place. And that rethinking can then be enough to make them now angry again and trigger all of that back up again. So you're always taught in those kind of cases, never talk to the person about what took place until the next day. Wait until the next day when their body will have normalized, all the sort of stress hormones have kind of rebalanced and their body's back normal. And then talk to them the next day, because then when they recall it and they're talking about it, they may get a bit kind of worked up while they're talking about it, but their body isn't already like primed, as if all you need to do is just switch the switch on and they're straight back to where they were. Their body is perhaps calm and relaxed, and turning a switch on is turning a switch on for anger in a calm and relaxed body. And so then it takes that while to build up. Yeah, within yourself, though, you have to be able to calm yourself down, etc., act normally or whatever. But the point about actually talking about it, so with the abuser I was talking about rather than with the person who's been abused, is that you wouldn't, or anyone who's actually aggressive, you wouldn't talk about it there and then, because re-triggering it would genuinely could re-trigger the whole thing straight back up exactly where it was. And in care homes, if you've just spent 4 or 5 hours dealing with extreme violence, finally sorted the situation out, the last thing you want to do is an hour later go and say, I've got to write my report. What took place? Why did you get angry? And now you've re-triggered it again. Now you get another 4 or 5 hours of the same thing because you went and spoke to them about it too soon. And obviously that's something you see with parents quite often, where a child will lose their temper and they'll fight maybe with their brother or sister or something. And then the parent will come and talk to them, trying to find out what's wrong and why that happened or whatever. But they'll do that so close to when it happened that you're kind of in a difficult position as a parent, because if you talk too soon, you re-trigger it. If you leave it till the next day, from a child's perspective, that was a lifetime away, and they don't have a clue what you're going on about. So you have to try and get that balance based on their understanding, and based on the response you're going to get. But in relation to people having to act normal quickly, there is that tendency that people do have to do that for potentially maybe the benefit of the children, or making sure the children are calmed down. Just like if you're in an emergency, you can be in an emergency absolutely terrified, or maybe you've gone through a stage of being angry as part of fighting to get out of that emergency, whatever it is. But you've got a child, so you have to try and calm yourself down and deal with that child and act confident and brave, or whatever terminology you want to use. You've got to be that person they need you to be, and break down later, almost. Kind of almost delay it until you're in a place where you can, kind of almost let that emotion overwhelm you at a time when what normally happens. For example, as a member of staff, I know that what normally happens when you've dealt with situations where you've genuinely been terrified for your life is you're terrified for your life, you calmly deal with it perfectly fine, and then kind of half an hour later, an hour later, when you finally literally dealt with everything and there's nothing left and you're sat in a room and you've now got tons of paperwork to write up, and now you can't write the paperwork because all of a sudden your hands are shaking and you've got cold sweats, and your body's having the reaction kind of that it should have had, an hour earlier or whatever it was during the incident. But during the incident, you're remaining totally calm and composed and dealing with it appropriately and keeping focused on dealing with it appropriately. And yet, obviously, within you, your body is trying to do something different. Your body's trying to act naturally, which is panic, run away, fight, all those sort of things. And you're overriding that. And so when you then have the time to stop overriding it, suddenly it kind of hits you. But yeah, bodies are fascinating. The way they kind of respond, and but it is also very helpful for people to learn how a body responds. And it is obviously something that, um, if you're always, and this was my argument in relation to why I felt the type of work I did worked very well in terms of turning around the behaviors of challenging children without ever working with the children. So I did a role where my job was to never ever see the child. I would meet with the parent, I would offer 6 sessions of parenting and never meet the child. And I would have to turn around, not me personally, but the idea of the service was to turn around the children's behavior, make it so they stop doing crime, and including things like violent crimes and what have you, stop doing antisocial behaviors, get themselves back into education, do their education properly as they're supposed to, um, and stop doing domestic abuse towards their parents and things like that. And it was to turn all that around in 6 sessions without ever meeting the child. And a lot of parents would say, that's impossible. I don't know why I'm bothering to be referred to your service. If you're not even going to meet my child, they're the problem, not me. How can you help if you're never going to meet the child? And there are times when I thought to myself, oh, this would be easier if I could just meet the child and also talk to the child. But that never happened in that role. And it also was incredibly successful, because my view was, you're the one that sees your child every single day. Even if your child saw the most incredible, say, psychiatrist or something once a week for an hour, which was probably 50 minutes, um, what is that psychiatrist going to be able to do in that 50 minutes that's going to last for literally the whole rest of the time the psychiatrist isn't around? That there's things the psychiatrist will know that could be done to transform that child and their behavior. But the psychiatrist can't do that within that 50 minutes. They can suggest what needs to change, etc., but they can't do it in that 50 minutes. They can't force the child to behave a certain way just in that short space of time. The child has free will. They can do what they want. In fact, they normally, under those circumstances, the child doesn't want to be there. It's the parent who wants the child to be there. So they're even less likely to pay attention. And so I would explain to parents that you're the one who's motivated to want things to be different. Your child, who's doing crime because they want to, doing antisocial behavior because they want to, beating you up because they want to, not going to school because they want to, then they're not very motivated to say, I'll go and get help to change my behavior and stop doing all these things that I currently want to do. So it's not saying that they want to do that as the only kind of thing. That's what's meeting their needs at that point in time, and that's what they are believing they want to be doing at them. If you sort of say to them, are you sure you really want to be going shoplifting? Well, yeah, it's exciting. It gives me a buzz. It gives me a sense of status because I can nick stuff that so and so likes or whatever. So so to try and get involved and stop that child is then a whole big kind of issue. So it's a question of, you're the one who wants things different. You're the one who wants your child to have the best start in life and wants your child to stop doing these things. I can help you to be able to essentially be a 24/7 therapist, in terms of, I can tell you or guide you how you can change your behavior. And we would look at how it can be done as minimally as possible, so it's as easy as possible to do, how you can change your behavior so that you behave similar to how I would behave when I worked in care homes and would have to be the parent of the children in a care home, where I would do the things that the parent needs to be doing. And once you start kind of talking about it like that, that actually, a psychiatrist seeing a child for 50 minutes a week when the child doesn't want to see the psychiatrist, doesn't want to engage, doesn't want things to change, is going to have far less success than me telling you what you can change at home as if you were the therapist, so that you're then kind of imposing a way of life on your child at home based on how you decide to lead your home life. And that's what would end up being successful. The challenge was always to find the way of doing it so that it was as minimal changes as possible. So if it's like you need to transform your life, clearly that's something that's anyone who's tried weight loss would know, that if someone said it's easy to lose weight, all you have to do is cut out all the chocolate that you keep eating every meal, cut out all of the carbs that you keep eating every meal, cut out all, and then you're thinking, hang on, no, 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 no. That means my life totally transforms and I'm going to be miserable. I'm going to stay fat. So, if the change is too big, people don't do it. But if you can make little subtle changes and think, right, where, and that was obviously my role, was to listen to the parent's story, listen to their situation, and look for the patterns and think, where can you make the tiniest changes that if you just tweaked that change. For example, one parent, it was a slightly different case because it was of younger children, so slightly different to what I've just been talking about. The children were, I think, 8 and 9 or something like that, and they regularly fought each other and would then get angry towards mum when she would intervene and try and deal with the situations. It was single mum, and then they would be angry on the way to school. So they'd wake up, they'd get angry in the morning over who sits next to mum at the breakfast table. There was like one of those breakfast bars that sticks out, and so there was 2 seats one side, 2 seats the other side, and they'd get angry over who sits next to mum at the breakfast table. Then they would carry on being angry in the car, pushing each other, kicking each other. Then that would carry on into school, and inevitably they'd be isolated in school, sent to isolation, and often sent home and stuff, which meant mum had to skip work to keep going and picking them up and look after them at home because they're not in school. And then she would then be angry at them, which would then make them say, "Oh, you're always blaming me. It's never my sister. It's never so and so." And so they would then, that would cause more conflict, and then this would then carry on and on and on and on and on. And then they'd go to bed angry over who's now going to get the story read at bedtime and first and all that sort of stuff. And then it would start the next day the same. And so I asked, obviously thinking, let's see if we can make some intervention as easy and quickly as possible. So this argument that happens in the morning at the breakfast table, what are you doing sitting at the breakfast table? Oh, well, I put the cereal in the middle of the table, get the bowls out. I make myself a coffee because obviously it's going to be a long day. Make myself a coffee and I sit down. And so I said, well, have you tried making coffee and standing next to the sink? And she said, no, I've never obviously tried that. I make coffee and I just sit down at the table. Well, what would happen if you made a coffee and stood next to the sink? And so the first time she did that, there was no argument over who sat next to mum at the breakfast table because mum wasn't sat at the breakfast table. That meant there was no argument on the way to school, and there was no argument at school. They didn't get kicked out of school. There was no argument on being picked up from school. There was no argument on the way home. And when mum then, obviously having that bit of evidence, didn't sit at the breakfast table for dinner, where they would all sit at the table for dinner, she again let them eat their dinner, and then she had hers afterwards when they went off to play. There was no argument then. And so the only bit of conflict was about who gets a story read at night. So just one small change that the mum was able to make literally led to every day having nearly no arguments in it, just from that one change. So that wasn't the only bit of work done, but from one observation and then one small change, totally transformed that mum's life. She was so much more capable of handling the evening bit when she wasn't already ridiculously stressed from having had a fight on her hands, from or or being worried about the fight. So she's already stressed before she's had a fight. She's worried about the fact there's going to be a fight. And so she'd wake up already think, oh, it's going to be another one of those days. It's going to be so stressful. They're going to fight in the morning. They're going to fight at breakfast. They're going to fight at this. They're going to have that fight at school. They're going to do that there. They're going to do that. So she's already thinking, I just need a coffee. I need to sit down because it's going to be a horrible day. And so that's the mindset she was starting the day in. But all of a sudden, that never happened. And so the next day, obviously, she's starting at a more positive place. But by the end of every day, even if there's a bit of a fight over who's going to get read a story first, um, you end up, not having that as being such a big issue, because you're not like on your stress levels, you're not a 9 out of 10 at bedtime or 10 out of 10 at bedtime. You're perhaps a 1 out of 10 at bedtime because nothing has stressed you out yet. Um, yeah. And obviously, my role is, and I use that as an example, I often say to parents, men, I often sort of use men as an example. I often say, it's common for fat, unfit men to be sat on a sofa, drinking beer, screaming at the TV, telling the football players how they should be playing and what they should be doing and how so and so should have passed to them. Are they thick and all that sort of stuff? And I say to the parents, if those men were put on that football pitch, do you think that they'd even get the ball, let alone run the length of the pitch with the ball, keeping it at their feet and getting it into the goal? And I would often point out that the reason the men can say what they're saying is because they've got perspective that the football players don't. The football player is being chased by perhaps 11, 12 other people, and they're trying to keep a ball at their feet. They're trying to get the ball to the goal. They're trying to score the goal. They're trying to look whether they need to pass it to someone. They can't just stop and take a look and think, oh, there's a space over there if I pass to that player. They've got to try and think on their feet, and they're trapped in the situation. The fat man at home who's screaming at the TV drunk, who thinks he knows better, he can see there's a massive gap around a player on the pitch because he's looking on his TV screen from home, not being chased by 12 men. And normally that would get parents kind of laughing and thinking, yep, that's true. And I sort of explain that's what your situation is. I'm the fat man at home who's seeing things that you can't see because you're too busy trying to juggle everything and keep yourself going from minute to minute, and you can't drop the ball, so you can't stop and think, best stop now and take a look at my situation. You can't do that because you're in the middle of it. I'm here to be the fat man who's saying there's a gap there, you could use it. And so I kind of normally explain it like that to help them see that my role isn't the expert. My role is the fat man on the couch who's helping them to see the gaps they can't see because they're too busy trying not to drop the ball. So yeah, so when you're in it, obviously it is significantly harder to see it. That's the same with, like, therapists get grief when they have problems. People say, you're a therapist, you should know how to deal with your anxiety. You're a therapist, you shouldn't be depressed. You're a therapist, you shouldn't get that problem. As if somehow by being a therapist it means that you've got a magic kind of wand. um, and the reality is you often know what you should be doing and how you should be doing it, but you're stuck in your situation and you can't get yourself out of your situation to look at it objectively to then make the changes. um, and that's kind of what you need. You need to somehow, and that's where help comes in, where someone else can just sort of be external from you, look in and help you to identify the gaps that you can't see because you're too busy just trying to survive. um, and it doesn't matter how clever and skilled you are or anything, you still end up in that same situation, in my opinion. And in my opinion, that is really the main role of any therapist. A therapist isn't there to be, telling clients how to get better, telling clients interpretations of their problems, telling clients, um, you need to connect more with it or any of that rubbish. The idea of a therapist is to be able to say, oh, there's a gap over there. And I know you can't see it because you're stuck in your problem. And so they help them to identify those gaps. Yeah, so therapists are almost human too. So you're not being followed into a bank. Not the kind of information I would notice. I'm not particularly good at noticing certain types of information, like what someone looks like, what's changed about them. I'd notice if they're carrying a hypnosis book or something. Yeah, I don't know how many stories I've done. What on? Don't know. Yeah, I like to think I'm not a robot, if that's referring to therapists. Um, Also, you are talking about images that are very small. I've obviously had my hair purple before. Maybe I should do it again. Dye my hair purple for no real reason, just because it's better than grey, perhaps. I'm going too grey nowadays. And it'd probably be very messy. You say joke in a separate line as if somehow that's kind of like I'm half choking. Yeah, so I've got to edit my story for Wednesday at some point. Oh, you type slow on your phone. You had to have done a space, didn't you, to start a new line? I can't remember what the story is. It's whatever the next one is on my list of ones to do. So the last one I did was the fortune teller one, I think. So the next one will be whatever came after that. I can't remember what came the week after that one. Can't remember if that's the cat one or not, or if I've already done that. And then obviously Monday night is the late night, the sort of, well, late night for me, um, sleep meditation creation-y session. So that'll be happening on Monday night. Abby's birthday is on the 15th, so I probably won't be on here on the 15th. Have a day off. I think that's Wednesday. Can't remember. Yeah, there's probably quite a lot of content currently because these have been quite a lot of live streams. And yeah, hopefully she does. Yeah, these have been sort of long live streams. I need to kind of get used to doing them shorter. Um, and yeah, I don't know what we can go and do though. We get to walk around the flat at the moment. Um, Obviously, tomorrow is chocolate day. So I'll be eating chocolate eggs and chocolate. Yeah, apart from tomorrow being chocolate day, I don't think most days do exist. I think they just blend into one. Yeah, I can't make another cake. I don't have any ingredients, and I don't plan on going out to a shop to get it. Yeah, I don't really eat breakfast, so it'll be I just eat meals when I think, right, my stomach is having food fed to it now. Um, but yeah, for me, I have to try and remember the days to some extent because I need to be able to remember. Do my stories sometimes take a complete left turn just so we think we fell asleep for a few? Well, that depends on your perspective. Um, I like to make sure that my stories don't have, I don't know, a general. Sometimes I want them just incredibly straightforward, um, but generally I quite like to have them so that you don't quite know where it's going. I like them to be multi-layered. I like them to normally cycle round and back to the beginning by the end. Um, I like them to have the healing parts done in different stages. So I would have kind of a sort of drifting inward part at the beginning of some kind, focusing attentiony part. Then I like to have it so that it goes into maybe educating around anxiety, and then maybe it will transition through walking through a doorway or walking through a forest or arriving on a beach or drifting off asleep and waking in a dream or whatever, some kind of transition. And then maybe that section covers worry and how to manage worry. And then out of that section, maybe you find a potion and drink a potion, or maybe you walk through another door, or maybe you walk into a building, or maybe you walk into a palace, or something that makes it so that you're then in another transition stage where, say, I might cover like how to manage stress or whatever, and then I'll work my way back from there, kind of closing all those loops that have been opened as I go. So I normally try and do that, but in doing so, that's often kind of separated out. For example, I don't know, it could be that I can't even remember off the top of my head how the fortune teller one goes. So I'm just going to try and make it up off the top of my head. So it could be, for example, that you meet a fortune teller and then a mist appears. So you've got a, oh yeah, that one was the one where I was asked if I could do one about someone writing a book. So I did the whole process of someone writing then their book, publishing their book, having it printed, going to the book launch, etc. I did the whole process from writing it through to book launch, and over kind of a year-long period. So, for example, for that, you're writing a book in a library. That kind of starts focusing the attention. The attention carries on being focused until you get to the machine in the dream. So you've got some traveling there, and then the mist and appearing on the beach and going to the ending up on the pirate ship. That all then transitions and teaches you some bits about sort of being relaxed, etc., and managing anxiety and what have you. Then you go underwater. You go off into the temple. You go and find the library. You learn even more. But now you've transitioned into another bit, so you can learn um, about, say, managing worry and stuff. And then you go from there out to another stage. In this case, I think it was back to being in the library eventually, and then going about your life, where you now learn about handling stress, where you've got like fixing up your car, you've got traveling through the seasons, all that kind of stuff, and then having your book launch of this is the end result of all of this work that's happened and what have you. So I'd have like the different therapeutic bits in the different sections, so that it's kind of like that bit of therapy is done there, then nice and neatly wrapped up, and then this bit of therapy is done here and neatly wrapped up, and then that bit of therapy is done there and that's neatly wrapped up, all with different metaphors, all following a kind of a structure, but hopefully things you wouldn't think. So hopefully you wouldn't think at the start of the story, while you're drifting off writing on a normal old-fashioned typewriter in a library, that you wouldn't think this is going to end up on a pirate ship. And then likewise, you don't even think necessarily that you're going to meet that fortune teller. And then when you meet the fortune teller, you don't think that you're going to end up on a pirate ship. And then on a pirate ship, you don't necessarily know what it is you're going diving for. So you don't realize you're going to go diving for this temple and what's in the temple. You don't know what's in the temple. And so you don't know that it's going to be scrolls and that it's going to be about knowledge and education and stuff. And then when you've got all that and you've dealt with the little owl that's in the temple and all these sort of things, you don't know that you're going to be fixing up your old car, and you don't know that you're going to end up. So hopefully you don't know what's coming through the whole thing. And obviously to get the most value from a sleep perspective, you would always start at the beginning. But I know that some people like to keep working their way through it, and will start at some point during the story for multiple nights if it's like an hour and 20 minutes or something. But for the therapeutic value, it's best to listen to it during the day, sitting in an upright chair when you're not going to be tired, not going to fall asleep. So you can use it like a proper healing meditation, where you can engage fully in the process and in the therapeutic knowledge. So if you need the therapy with all of my stories, if you need the therapy around stress, worry, and anxiety, then you want to be able to engage fully in the whole story from start to finish. If you are using it just to fall asleep, then listening from the beginning is likely to have the best impact for falling asleep. But if you don't fall asleep because you're too busy worrying and being anxious or stressed or whatever, as long as you're engaging with it, you're then engaging with the therapeutic content, meaning that if you stay awake, you get the therapy. If you fall asleep, you get the sleep, which is what you also want. So it's kind of win-win. But yeah, so the thing about tuning out is that sometimes, even if you don't necessarily tune out for that long, even if it's just a fraction of a second, you can find yourself in a very, very different place. So, for example, you could tune out for a fraction of a second when you're in front of, say, the fortune teller, and the next minute you're on a pirate ship, and perhaps thinking, why am I on a pirate ship? I was standing in in amusements a minute ago in front of a fortune telling machine. Or likewise, while you're on the pirate ship and you're in the hammock and you're falling asleep swinging in the hammock, next minute you're in a dream. But if you zoned out just for a few seconds between getting in the hammock and being in the dream, you could think, why am I in a meadow looking out over a palace with a um, wizardy looking character with a dragon flying in the sky? I was literally on the sea a moment ago drinking tea with pirates. Um, so then, because you've zoned out just for that wrong second, suddenly it's like, am I listening to something vastly different? Because this doesn't sound like the same story I was listening to. Um, you can ask questions. Yeah, I do have some with robots in. I can't remember which stories are which though. Um, and so that's the other one that I I've obviously got nearly 190 stories currently, 190 individual unique stories on my channel, and I've then got some repeated more than once because I've got the ones with backing music and sound effects and things, and they're ones that I've already released in the past that I'm just re-releasing versions that include um, backing sounds and music. So those are ones made how I like listening to them rather than how my viewers generally like listening to them. Um, and so having done so many, and especially some of them having different twists and turns, I often have no idea unless I get some prompts. I often have no idea. Like yesterday, when I was prompted about the witch, I couldn't work out in my head which one had the witch because I've had a few that have had a witch, and I didn't know which witch is which. And but once it mentioned the superhero, I instantly thought, ah, superhero. That's the one with the otter, platypus, and beaver. I remember that one because they were so memorable. So saying deeper varies from story to story. Sometimes I may not say it at all. It would only be said. It's like people tell me that they want me to say deeper, more in stories. People tell me, "Oh, it's so effective when you say that's right or that's it." And I always point out, I'm only going to say those things if it's exactly relevant for that moment in that story. I don't say it just for the fun of it. I say it because it's relevant in that moment. So if you're walking deeper and deeper into a cave, saying you're walking deeper and deeper into a cave is relevant. If you're, if I say, um, and you find yourself looking up at the sky and taking a deep breath, my assumption is that if you're following this like you should be, you're now going to, in your mind's eye, be looking up at the sky and you're going to take a breath because that's what you've just been told to do. So I will then wait just a moment for you to do that. So I don't say it in, I don't say, and you can find yourself looking up at the sky and taking a deep breath. That's it. Because that's too quick. I'll say you can take a moment to look up at the sky and take a deep breath. That's it. So I'll say it as you're doing, hopefully, the out breath. So you've done, yeah, and take a deep breath, and then you go, and then as you breathe out, so about 5, 6 seconds later, I'm then saying, that's it, on your out breath. And where people then get annoyed is people say there was that big long pause and they get annoyed with the pause. But actually, the pause was relevant to what you were doing if you were following along to what I was asking you to do. Um, so I only ever say these things if they're directly relevant, but I am aware that when I do say certain things, they have that kind of impact on people that makes people um, habituate to drifting deeper because that's what they've got used to when they've heard it. Um, but I try to make a point of not doing these things just for the sake of it. Um, Sometimes I'll orchestrate things just for this because people have asked for it. So people will say, oh, "I'd love it if you can get some counting in here." So I might orchestrate it and then try and work out a way of wording it that I'm going to count downwards because I feel that makes it feel more like you're going deeper if you go like 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. Sounds like you're going deeper than going 1, 2, 3. It just sounds wrong, in my opinion. So I'll then orchestrate it that maybe I'm going to have a staircase, and then it'll be in the dark. So it'll be walking down into a cave or something, and it's dark, and you shine a light down. You can see that there's like 10 steps or something. And so, because it's quite dark, once you start moving away from the entrance, you count yourself down those stairs or something. So I might orchestrate things occasionally if people have asked me to, because obviously I'm making these as part of live streams normally. So if people have said to me, I'd love it if you could get counting in or something, then I'm obviously going to see if I can orchestrate that into it. Um, Talking about commands, and getting specific commands registering in your brain to fall asleep, for example. But if you say putting on a story for your cat and you go about your day to day, and you're going about day to day, aren't you making yourself less sensitive to such commands? If you're not paying attention to it, so if you put, it's a bit like music. If you put music on, um, say, I don't know, say you're doing the cleaning in the kitchen, but you've got the TV on in the living room, and in the living room on the TV is like MTV or some music channel or something, and you're not really paying attention to it, you might occasionally capture a hearing of it, so to speak, and find yourself kind of bopping along a bit to some of it if it's more catchy. But there would be an enormous amount of it where you don't engage with the music. You're busy cleaning or whatever you're doing, and you're so focused on what you're doing that the TV on in the background doesn't register. Um, if there's something emotive, so there are exceptions. If something's highly emotive, that can still register. So, say for example, actually on in the other room was, I don't know, a comedy like Fraser or something. Say Fraser was on in the living room, and you've walked off to go and do something else. You're not going to laugh at the jokes and things because you're not really paying enough attention necessarily while you're doing the cleaning to register exactly the context and what's going on. But if, say, it went to an advert and there was a car backfiring on the advert, you might jump because you hear this car backfiring and think it sounds like a shotgun or something. Yeah, a gunshot even firing. Because that's something that stands out among the rest of what's going on. And so the same goes. There was a situation which I've told a number of times, but a situation where a child, I was working with the parent, a child freaked out one day, and he was at home. He was in his in the lounge. He was playing on his Nintendo DS, and then all of a sudden, out of the blue, according to the parent, he threw the Nintendo DS across the room, smashed up the living room, and the mum had asked him, "What did you do that for? Why did you smash everything up? Why have you lost your temper and got angry, etc.?" And the child said, "I don't know. I don't know. I just suddenly felt angry." And the child couldn't explain what had happened. And so what I wanted to know was what was going on at the time, and asking what instead of why. So asking what you were doing to the child rather than why did you get angry. So why questions are questions that you should almost never ask because it gets an opinion based answer, not a factual answer. So the opinion might be fact, but it's not asking for a fact, it's asking for someone's opinion on something. So why did you do that? Someone thinks of why they think they might have done it, which may or may not be correct. You ask what happened, what were you doing before you got angry? Oh, I was sat on the sofa, I was just playing my game, I was playing whatever the game was on the Nintendo DS. Okay, then what happened? What else was going on in the room with you? The TV was on. Do you remember what was on the TV? It was Jeremy Kyle that was on TV, which is not on anymore, but it's a kind of Jerry Springer type of show. And the mum knew that was on and was able to say, "Oh, it's Jeremy Kyle was on TV." And what was Jeremy Kyle about? So I asked the mum, what was Jeremy card about? Oh, it was about absent fathers, etc. And this kid's dad had kind of left home a couple of years earlier and had essentially been an absent father. And this kid had struggled with this, and incidents had happened at school around Father's Day and things like that, where all the kids would be told to make cards for their fathers. And he would get angry and flip tables over and lose his temper because of the fact that he didn't have a father at home to make a card for. His dad deserted him, as he saw it. And so you could work out the pattern of what happened, because for that child that was an emotive thing, that something, I don't know, I didn't watch the episode so I don't know what was said, but you could work out that something in that moment must have been said or heard, similar to the Father's Day card thing, must have been said or heard, that he registered as being highly emotive, that stood out from the background, people arguing and doing normal Jeremy Kyle stuff. Something must have related directly to him and his situation that made him aware of it without consciously being aware of it. So that part of it, a suggestion could go in that if you're hearing it in the background because you've turned it on for your cats or whatever, then it could be that you register bits and pieces that just happen to stand out because they have relevance. But you're not going to get anywhere near the same level of positive effect from it as you would if you sat down, focused your attention on it, dedicated your time and energy to engaging with the process kind of meaningfully. Yeah, pauses are very good and very helpful and very important. You're not making anything harder to fall asleep to when you. So if you listen to my, for example, and I listen to my tracks when I'm editing them, but I'm focusing on them when editing them, and so I find it really hard to stay awake to them. So especially if it's a long track, I find it really hard to concentrate for the whole track in one editing session, because for, like, say, a half-hour track, it could take me about 2 hours to edit. So if I've got a track that's 90 minutes long, that's going to take me most of the day to edit it, and I have to stay focused for that entire time. I can walk away briefly and come back, but I have to do it in like one session. But I do have things on, and I know people who have things like that, my tracks on in the background, because it helps them to be calm while they're doing other things, but they're not paying too much attention. They're just being calm because they can hear my voice and they find my voice itself, just the sound, calming, not the words I'm specifically using or anything, just the fact that I'm there with my voice in the background. It doesn't make any difference in relation to when you then go to fall asleep. You're still going, it wouldn't make it harder. What can happen though is you can make things easier. So for example, if you only ever listen to my voice saying, okay, just take a moment to close your eyes and begin to drift asleep. And as you begin to drift asleep, I'm just going to tell a story in the background. And while I tell the story, I don't know if you'll go deeper with the sound of my words or the spaces between my words. And if you only ever listen to that kind of part at bedtime, when you're closing your eyes, when you're going to sleep, obviously you start setting up a trigger that when you hear my voice doing that, it instantly starts under the right context. So it has to be about the right context. So it's a bit like you'll see stage hypnotists who'll hypnotize people, and then they'll say, in the future, anytime you hear me say the word sleep, you'll just close your eyes and you'll drop off straight back into a hypnosis. And that only ends up working in the right context. If they do it on a street in a context that totally is inappropriate, it doesn't end up working. So I had this, it doesn't mean it doesn't always happen and then they jolt out of it or whatever. But I had this, for example, I set up a laughter anchor where I would be able to touch someone on their kneecap and they would just crack up laughing uncontrollably. And This is very amusing as done as a demonstration. It's very amusing when done, like when you're, say, if they come and visit and you're sat at home and you just, while talking, you reach over, tap them on the kneecap, and they just crease up laughing. What doesn't happen is if you tap them on the kneecap when they're out and about, like in a cafe, sometimes they might feel a little smirk come across their face, but then they don't actually turn into laughter because they know they feel self-conscious. They feel like this isn't an appropriate place to laugh, and so they just don't follow the suggestion. And they don't know because it's just a tap on the kneecap. They don't even notice you've just tapped them on the kneecap. Um, because it's just a subtle little thing, and they're not consciously spending all their time thinking, "Will Dan tap me on the kneecap today?" Um, the same, it could be like I've had done it where you just tap someone lightly on the side of the arm or something to trigger it, and so you sort of say, "Oh, hi, how are you?" and just tap them gently on the arm. And if you've not seen them for ages, they just think you're greeting them. They're not instantly thinking, "Oh, that was him doing his hypnosis." Um, and if it's in the right context, they'll then laugh. And if it's not in the right context, then again they might smile or feel like they want to laugh, but they don't because it doesn't feel like the right time. But sometimes it can happen unexpectedly even then. So I had someone who had a laughter anchor set up with their knuckle, and it was to I was they were learning hypnosis, and I was demonstrating it and teaching it with them and on them at the same time, so that they could experience it as well as learning it to do it. And they went to a funeral, rubbed their face with their fist, and triggered the laughter anchor and creased up laughing. Um, as it turned out, they felt that was entirely appropriate, and they really found it amusing, and they thought it was just the funniest thing ever, creasing up uncontrollably laughing in the middle of this person's funeral. So so even though normally that sort of thing wouldn't happen in because that's not how it was set up, um, on some level they probably knew that they were going to go with it when it happened. Um, so yes, you're not going to make yourself less sensitive by kind of just having it on in the background, but you can make things more effective by engaging with them more. Yeah, habituating is good. Do I use a British accent when I say sod off? I don't know. I just say sod off in my accent. I don't know. Um, I don't count in each and every live stream. In fact, in most of them, I don't count, I don't think. Do I? Not during the stories, at least. Oh, it's jumped down a bit. Hello to someone who joined, but it's jumped down. So, yeah, we're in lockdown here. Is that an oh no at someone reading the chats, seeing what you've all been up to? If we were friends, you wouldn't have to be suspicious of hypnosis randomly occurring. You can just take it as granted that it will be occurring, and be more suspicious of whether I'm going to ever have any moments where it's not occurring. Oh, I just suddenly see, do you talk in a British accent when you say sod off? It's like, what a weird thing to ask a British person on air. Um, Well, any hypnosis is only about focusing attention and increasing responsiveness. It's not any form of therapy. So obviously, if someone who's depressed is willing to engage in something like setting up a laughter anchor, for example, then you could set up that anchor and they could use it. Things also kind of dilute themselves. So if someone keeps on, say, using, I don't know, say you set up um, an anchor for calmness, and someone kept on doing public speaking, feeling anxious, and the idea was that they were going to trigger the calmness whenever they did public speaking. If it's done in a way that means that they walk out to do the speaking and they're anxious, and then they trigger, say, with thumb and that finger or something, that's going to make you calm. They trigger calmness. If they're triggering the calmness on top of anxiety all the time, what they're doing is linking that with the calmness that comes from doing that with the anxiety they're feeling already. So they gradually start kind of diluting it they do it that way. So what you would want, for example, is that they naturally start thinking about, say, public. You want to find that earliest point. So they naturally start thinking, oh, I'm about to go and do a talk. And thinking, I'm about to go and do a talk, instead of thinking, I'm about to go and do a talk and then feeling anxious and then having to use a calming anchor to calm themselves down, the anchor becomes, I'm about to go and do a talk, and that triggers calmness or excitement or whatever it happens to be. Um, so, what you ideally want is not to have an anchor that keeps getting worn down by something, by a different state. So, if someone, for example, had uncontrollable laughter, a trigger for uncontrollable laughter, and kept trying to use it when they were depressed, it might trigger the laughter if they're happy to engage in the process of it triggering the laughter. But the chances are, if they're doing that while feeling depressed, it will keep watering itself down. And the stronger the feeling of depression is, the quicker it's going to water that down until it just doesn't cause that anymore. In fact, doing it will remind you that you're depressed. So yeah, so really, hypnosis, the idea is that you use it within therapy, so within a broader bit of therapy, rather than using it almost like that is the therapy. How are you telling each other are saying things in British accents? And I wonder what kind of British accent you're thinking of, whether it would be like a posh British accent or a more normal one. So it's I was hoping to start trying to make these shorter and um, not 3 hours long. So I need to still learn that to try and be more punctual with my time endings. Obviously, the depression is involves having a bunch of chemicals running through your body and brain as well. So if you're already depressed, you're going to have a certain mind body state, that's leading to the experience of depression. So that's going to be a mix of bodily stuff, like certain chemicals going through your body, and not going through your body as well. There's normally a depletion of serotonin, for example. Um, and there's obviously certain way thinking styles and all sorts of things that go with it. So just suddenly laughing isn't necessarily going to always undo everything else, like on a permanent kind of basis. So it isn't necessarily as simple as if you've laughed once, you're not depressed now. Um, any anchor, and well, anchoring is just essentially Pavlovian conditioning. So it's linking a stimulus and a response. It's as simple as that. And so if you uh, set up an anchor, every time you use it, obviously that anchor is a bit like memory. Memory isn't like a video player. Your memory is changed every single time you recall something. So if you recall, I don't know, if you recall a happy memory when you're depressed, you normally look back on it in that moment in time and think, well, I thought I was happy at the time, but I don't think I really was, because you are now clouding it with the fact you're recalling it while depressed. If you recall, say, a sad memory while happy, you look back and think, yeah, that wasn't a particularly good period of my life. But you don't end up feeling as bad about it when you look back on it. When you're happy, you see it normally as kind of, yeah, that was a one off. You see it in a different kind of way. So how you are here and now influences, yeah, everything's state dependent. So that ends up influencing the other bits and pieces. So with anchoring, you can, for example, bring your thumb and maybe thumb and forefinger together. So you can, for example, sit there and think, right, I'm going to, I don't know, focus on happy memories. And while you think of happy memories that make you smile and make you happy, you bring your thumb and finger together, and you keep doing that repeatedly. The stronger the emotion, the less you have to do it. But you keep doing that repeatedly, so that then all you have to do is every time you bring your thumb and finger together, you feel that emotion flooding into you. You feel that happiness. So you set it up and you get it to a point where just bringing the thumb and finger together triggers that positive feeling. But if you then trigger it when you're feeling low, you are now essentially, in the same way that when you practiced it, the state you were in every time you did that is what you linked to that trigger. The state you're in when you do that, at the time you do that, is what you link to the trigger. So you're then linking say you're depressed, you're linking the depression to the trigger as much as you were linking the happiness to the trigger. So you start watering the happiness down because you're linking that depression to it. The way to avoid that, obviously, is that you have to figure out a different kind of routine. So with something like depression, you may not do it because you may not have a period where it's like, oh, that's a period where I'm not depressed, and that's the trigger for my depression. So I want that trigger to be the trigger for not being depressed instead. Whereas with something like anxiety, it could be, I know this situation causes me anxiety. So what I'll do is set up a trigger that precedes that, so that you go into the situation that would cause you anxiety already not feeling anxious. So that you go in, and because you don't feel the anxiety, you then don't dilute down that trigger, because you haven't had the trigger fire, because you didn't go into it to fire in that way. I generally find the most effective thing is actually to use mental rehearsal, so that you can set up the mental rehearsal around whatever it is that you're doing. So you can imagine, say, for example, it's an anxiety thing. You can imagine yourself mentally rehearsing being in the state you want to be in every time you go into that situation, so that it then becomes like, because your brain can't tell the difference between something that's vividly imagined and something that's real, it responds physiologically the same. You can then set up so that your brain responds as if you've done this 1,000 times, so that when you do it for real the one time, your brain already thinks you've done this so many times that it just knows this is how I'm supposed to respond, and you then respond in that way in the real situation, because you've practiced responding that way so often that now this is just a long, one of a long line of responding in this improved way. Um, but as I say, there's so much around therapy for different conditions that you need to do around little bits of, like, just a single technique is normally not enough. It's not normally that simple that you can just say, do this technique and it'll all work. Um, like, it could be that something you do when you first wake up in the morning is a specific ritual that's designed to make you feel good, that becomes your ritual for feeling good. Like, so some evidence-based things around depression are things like, write down before you go to bed 5 things you've been grateful for from that day. And it could be anything. Like, you could be grateful that you didn't get hit by a car, for example. So it doesn't have to be like, some people will say, I can't think of anything that happened that's good today. It doesn't have to be good. It's things you're grateful for. And then you could do the opposite. You could do, and or it's preferable you do both. 5 things in the morning. 5 things you're looking forward to that day. 5 things that you've got positive coming up in some way. And again, it can be incredibly small. It could be, I'm going to get my washing up done, or it could be, I'm going to clean the kitchen floor, or I'm going to make my bed this morning, or it doesn't have to be big things at all. It's just, these are some things I'm looking forward to. And so there are little bits like that that you can start to do that just start setting you up in a different way for the way forward. Um, and then you can do things like, if you give yourself good feelings at all, if if something happens, like say you're watching a comedy and you laugh, um, it could be that you set up an anchor while you're watching the comedy. You do something that you can repeat in the future. Every time you laugh at Peter Kay or whatever the comedy happens to be, every time you laugh, you set up a trigger so that you then start to make it so that that's what I do when I want to feel that good feeling, and think about that. And you have to start doing it kind of consciously, but then you end up, um, it becomes automatic. And I've done things like with actors, setting it up so you can do like, happiness, sadness, anger, anxiety, etc. So that if they walk into say they're doing a film, they can literally think, I need to cry now. So you trigger the one that makes you bawl your eyes out and feel really sad, or I need to be really happy now. So you trigger the one that makes you really happy, so that you can quickly go into the emotion that you need. So anyway, let's have a look. I'm about to go, so I'm just going to read the last few bits here. Make what shorter? I don't know what that question is referring to. Oh, make these live streams. Yeah, 3 hours is shorter than yesterday. Um, if I make them shorter, I'd probably assume I'd have the opposite. Rather than it being more people have the possibility to watch them afterwards, it would probably be fewer people. The same number of people can watch it afterwards. It makes no difference there. They just have more of it to watch. But it means more people can join in during it, because there are people who, if I start at say 7:30, there are people who, so that's UK time. There are people who end up kind of saying, "Oh, I've literally only just been able to get out of work," and it's then like 8:30 or 9 o'clock, and so they would have missed out if I'd finished at 8:30. They would have missed out, and they'd have to watch it afterwards. They couldn't join in, um, and so yeah, then they might be sad they missed it because they couldn't join in. Um, but yeah, so any anchor could be used. So for example, with people, I obviously use my voice a lot. So I'll yeah, no, I meant do the opposite, as in do the opposite time of day. Do the morning, not just the night, as opposed to do the opposite task Um, my poor use of language. Um, yeah. So yeah, for me, I often use my voice a lot, and I do things like for example, when I talk with people, I'll look into their left eye as me looking at the person, look into their left eye while talking to them. But when I want to say give a suggestion or an idea, I'll look into their right eye, and people don't notice that you're looking from one eye to the other. And if you watch any footage of like close-up footage of films, you watch that people's eyes go like that because people naturally look from one eye to the other all the time. But you can do that intentionally, and people don't notice you're doing it. So you can then literally talk to someone, and every time you say something that you want them to focus on, you can be talking away and then kind of say about relaxing deeply, and then look away again, then say about going deeper and deeper, and keep looking back to their eyes, to their other eye, every time you give the suggestion that you want them to pick up on. They won't know you're doing it. They'll think it's just a normal conversation. In my view, is if you're someone like a hypnotist or a therapist, you want to be doing this stuff every minute of every day, so that you're just used to this is just part of the way you communicate, so that you don't have to think about the way you're communicating too much. And that way, you always know whoever you communicate with, whenever you need to give ideas to them or anything like that, you can just do it instinctively and automatically without having to try and set it up in advance, because it's already set up with every human being that you interact with. So it is now 6 minutes, 3 hours and 6 minutes, and I will probably attempt to make tomorrow an hour. See, you can remind me to keep me on track. I remember today thinking I have a bit of a problem with time and with processing how much time has passed. Um, for example, today I thought, right, it's probably been about 40 minutes now, 30 or 40 minutes. So I should start thinking about wrapping up. And I gazed up at the counter that's up in the top corner next to where it says live. For me, I don't know what it looks like for you from your angle, but for me, up in this top corner, it says live and then has a counter. I gazed up at that and it said 1 hour, 49 minutes. And I thought, well, that's an hour wrong. Yeah, so I need talking clocks. And I literally genuinely thought that I was just maybe, 40 minutes, 30 or 40 minutes towards an hour, and realized I'd already gone way over. And then literally I've glanced away to be watching the live chat bit and engaging with you. And now it's saying 3 hours, 7 minutes. And I don't know where all that time has disappeared to. So I'm surprised that people haven't fallen asleep and got bored, given that I've been here for this long. Maybe you're swapping family members or something. You say, can you take over as me for a bit? Make Dan think I'm still there. Just keep commenting something random every now and then. But yeah, so the time just seems to disappear so quickly that I don't know what's happened. Yeah, so time does fly. And it is a problem I have an awful lot, that I can think 1 minute has passed and be told hours and hours have passed. So yeah, maybe keeping track a bit more so that I can try and keep these a bit more succinct, keep them to an hour so that I don't overwork, because or else it gets late and I carry on doing things after I've finished, and obviously I do other work around it, and then I end up thinking, oh, my time has gone. When do I get TV time? Time to watch my own, watch YouTube videos by other YouTubers. So yeah, so thank you all, obviously, for joining in. I'm grateful for everyone who chooses to join in when you could be doing so many other, probably significantly more fun and entertaining things. And hopefully some of what I've said has been helpful or whatever. I'm always happy to answer pretty much anything someone asks me if I know the answer, and if I don't, I'm happy to say I don't know it. Yeah, if you haven't already, feel free to give a thumbs up. Obviously, it all helps. And if you're not already subscribed, feel free to subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow. Don't know what I'll do tomorrow. I'll think of something for a thumbnail, and I will be here seeing those of you who join me on Chocolate Sunday, as it should be known. So I'll see you then. Thank you for joining me here.